In the bustling heart of Seoul, 1993, a new era was dawning. Amidst the towers of Jowa Securities, Gangdong branch, a voice boomed, promising a staggering 700 million won. At least a 30% return in 1 month. Inside an office, President Hwang's fury erupted as he slammed his fist, demanding, "Can you do it or not? Just give me a straight answer." As a young man tried to calm him, President Hwang's rage intensified, shouting, "Calm down, my ass. Do you really not know who I am?" Confidently, Jin-hu, in the body of Cha Dae-woo, met the challenge. "Of course I do. You're President Hwang, aren't you?" Then, with a sly proposal that stunned the president, Jin-hu suggested, "Instead of 30%, how about over 40%? The new hire at Jowa Securities, Jin-hu, as Cha Dae-woo, declared with a confident smirk that he would grow the investment by over 40% within a month. Skeptical, President Hwang questioned the feasibility, but Jin-hu, with self-assured determination, insisted it was his duty to make it happen since it was President Hwang's money. President Hwang pressed him, "And how exactly are you going to do that?" A document rustled as Jin-hu presented it, asking if he knew of Seijin Trading, a name President Hwang denied ever hearing. Jin-hu explained that in 1993, Seijin Trading was a stock nobody paid attention to. His eye, sharp and focused, snapped with intense anticipation of the revelation to come. Jin-hu then laid out his precise prediction: "It's going to trade sideways for a while. But next week, the government will make an announcement regarding exports. Then it'll trend upward, for a few days." While other employees listened in stunned amazement, Jin-hu detailed his strategy. "In 3 weeks, if we sell on a day when the opening price matches the previous day's closing price, you'll make at least 40%. With a daring smirk, Jin-hu pledged to personally cover the difference if his predictions didn't come true. His hand placed firmly on the document, Jin-hu asserted his terms. If he was right, President Hwang would introduce him to his associates. Leaning forward, Jin-hu challenged, "Are you in, President Hwang?" President Hwang, grumbling a veiled threat that "it better work out, or else," left the office as a female office worker politely bade him farewell. The female colleague admired Jin-hu's innate talent, remarking that everyone usually struggled at first, to which he responded with a casual stretch and feigned surprise. Jin-hu's thoughtful expression hinted at a profound, unspoken secret. He mused internally, "Well, this is my second time living through 1993. His colleague, offering a cup, reiterated her surprise at his exceptional abilities, despite knowing he was top of his class during recruitment. Jin-hu remained silent, holding his cup, lost in contemplation. The narration questioned how accurate Cha Dae-woo's predictions could be, highlighting the improbability of his foresight. He reflected that such knowledge was only possible, because after I died in 2020. I traveled back in time and possessed this body, Jin-hu thought, seeing the serious reflection of his former self in the liquid of his cup. In 2020, amidst the COVID pandemic, a news report ominously listed 2 men among the fatalities, but the narration revealed their deaths were merely a cover-up. A document displayed their names, Jin-hu, Chairman Joe Manhwa's heir, and Cha Dae-woo, a Jowa Group employee, as the narration exposed the fabricated cause of death. The truth, the narration declared, was far more sinister. Jin-hu's face was brutally struck, blood splattering from his nose and mouth as his eyes widened in agony. A sadistic man, holding Jin-hu's hair, taunted him, asking if it felt good to watch his only friend, the original Cha Dae-woo, gasp and shiver as he collapsed. Jin-hu's bloody hand reached out in despair as he fell, a tragic victim in a dark string of hidden murders. The narration explained that in 2020, both Cha Dae-woo and Jin-hu were murdered, and afterward, drawn by fragments of memories and emotions, Jin-hu flowed back in time, transferring into the body of the new hire Cha Dae-woo, in 1993. But it was not just his memories that remained, Jin-hu realized as a painful sensation pounded through his head. A hand violently grabbed the young man's head, pulling it back forcefully. The current Jin-hu clutched his head in pain as the memory of the original Cha Dae-woo's heroic plea to run echoed, reminding him that the original Cha Dae-woo's memories and emotions from 2020 were getting clearer. He reflected on this unfamiliar sensation for someone like him, who rarely felt emotions. But now, Jin-hu's determined eyes showed a dawning understanding. Walking through a bustling city street, Jin-hu pondered the mysterious circumstances of his return. With a subtle smirk, he thought, I don't mind it. Looking up at a towering building, Jin-hu identified the powerful feeling boiling within him as anger and thirst for revenge. With an intense smirk, he found the sensation fascinating, feeling truly alive for the first time. Meanwhile, within the opulent walls of the Jowa Group, one of South Korea's top 3 conglomerates, a baby's wailing marked a new beginning. Amidst soft light and sparkling motifs, a child was born, their cries echoing gently. The child, a solemn young Jin-hu, was showered with applause and hailed as a genius, carrying everyone's expectations for the future. His extraordinary development was evident as he could speak at a mere 5 months old. By the age of 3, young Jin-hu had already mastered English, Spanish, and Chinese, surrounded by books in a studious room. From piano to violin and even the fine arts, a display of trophies and medals attested to the child's evaluation as a prodigy destined to lead the group. That is, until an ominous rumor began to spread. A doctor, with a grave expression, delivered the diagnosis: he has savant syndrome. Jin-hu's mother reacted with shock as the doctor explained his communication difficulties and persistent issues interacting with others. The doctor's hand tapped on the desk as he further detailed Jin-hu's symptoms, repeating specific words or actions and showing extreme obsession with limited interests. To his parents' shock and distress, the doctor formally confirmed, he has savant syndrome, a form of autism. While acknowledging Jin-hu's extraordinary talents in specific areas, the doctor's words brought tears to his mother's eyes, confirming the tragic diagnosis of savant syndrome. After that day, a darker phase in Jin-hu's life began. Young Jin-hu stood by a closed door, his world completely cut off from the outside. His small hand reached for the door handle, yearning for freedom. But as the door creaked open, an adult's voice shouted, "Stop," and a hand grabbed his wrist, making him stumble back. His father, kneeling in anger, fumed, "What are you doing? I told you not to come out. Why won't you listen, why?" while his mother watched with concern. Gripping his terrified son's head, Jin-hu's father demanded an answer, an immediate promise never to step outside that room again. This restrictive life repeated itself for over 10 years, until a catastrophic plane explosion signaled a dramatic change. It ended only until my caretakers. No, my parents, passed away. A solemn traditional Korean funeral altar confirmed the passing of Jin-hu's parents. Adult Jin-hu stood before the altar, his gaze blank, showing no overt emotion. But then, Jin-hu turned away, angered and distressed by the idea of a forced marriage, gasping at the thought, "Why do I have to marry that monster?" An angry man in a gray suit seized a young woman by the shoulder, explaining for what seemed like the 100th time that it was for the Jowa Group inheritance, because Jin-hu was the sole heir. The young woman, Oh Jong-yun, responded with furious defiance, proclaiming, "I still hate it. It's humiliating." The man in the gray suit violently grabbed Oh Jong-yun by the neck, ordering her to get a grip. With a menacing look, he revealed the immense fortune at stake. "It's a fortune worth over 1,000,000,000 won. Once you sign the marriage papers, that 1,000,000,000 won is in our hands." He yelled at a cowering Oh Jong-yun, demanding she make this sacrifice given her privileged upbringing as the daughter of the Okyung group. Oh Jong-yun looked down, silent in her defeat and humiliation. She begrudgingly agreed, telling her father to stop, prompting a satisfied pat on her shoulder. Jin-hu's head was violently pulled back by the hair, his mouth open in pain and surprise. A man in a blue suit roughly dragged Jin-hu by the hair, angrily demanding he come out. The man then forced Jin-hu to his knees, pushing his head down mockingly, don't you need to greet your father-in-law? With a sadistic smirk, the man pulled Jin-hu's hair, forcing his head down even further, demanding a proper bow. Oh Jong-yun, wiping her nose with disdain, dismissively told director Jung Song-ji not to waste his energy on Jin-hu. As Jin-hu was dragged across the floor, Oh Jong-yun callously revealed their plan, because once the marriage registration is complete, he's just going to be dumped at the Gapyeong villa. Director Jung Song-jin cackled, his grin sinister as he revealed their ultimate intention to lock him up there for the rest of his life, and pick a good time to kill him off. Standing victoriously over the captive Jin-hu, Director Jung proudly declared that the Jowa group would then belong to their Okyung group. Jin-hu stumbled and struggled as Director Jung cruelly dismissed him as a half-wit, unaffected by further confinement since he'd spent his whole life locked away anyway. Jin-hu stared upward with wide, blank eyes, numb and traumatized by the abuse. As Chairman Oh had planned, Jin-hu was secretly relocated immediately after his parents' funeral. His life, which he thought had hit rock bottom, plunged even deeper into the abyss as he was taken to an isolated, foreboding mansion under a full moon. He was left with nothing but pitch-black darkness and agonizing hunger, huddled in a corner, neglected and emaciated. The only person who showed him any kindness was a complete stranger. That stranger was the original Cha Dae-woo, who approached the crouching Jin-hu with concern, asking if he was in the corner again. Cha Dae-woo gently stroked Jin-hu's head, kindly remarking, "Your hair has grown a lot." With caring attention, Cha Dae-woo cut Jin-hu's hair, asking if he had a preferred style or if he should just cut it short. For over 10 long years, Cha Dae-woo was the only one who looked after Jin-hu, a montage of their shared moments depicting his unwavering care. The current Jin-hu, his face twisted with anger and pain, recalled that this same Cha Dae-woo had refused his boss's orders to kill him, and was murdered for it. Pressing his hands to his chest, Jin-hu reflected that he had only flinched then, but now he understood this profound feeling. With an enraged expression and a clenched fist on the desk, Jin-hu declared he was devastated and enraged by the death of my only friend, Chadaewo. A miraculous opportunity, the narration stated, had found him. With teeth clenched and a determined, angry expression, Jin-hu vowed, "I absolutely will not live like I did before." Director Jung Song-jin tapped Jin-hu's shoulder, challenging him about his intense glare. Why are you glaring at me like you're going to eat me? With a condescending smirk, Director Jung remarked, "Look at you, your shoulders are all stiff." Jin-hu remained silent, his expression a mix of surprise and annoyance. Director Jung Song-jin walked away with a patronizing wave, advising Jin-hu to pace yourself, all right? You won't find another senior as nice as me. Internally, Jin-hu scoffed at the advice. Pace myself? I can't do that. I have a long way to go. His intense blue eye fixed on his target, Jin-hu vowed, "I will tear down the Okyung group from its roots." With unwavering resolve, Jin-hu declared his ultimate purpose, for Cha Dae-woo's revenge and my own salvation. With both of them in my grasp, I will become your true monster. A colleague interrupted the ordinary office hum to ask Cha Dae-woo for a stock ticker book. As his colleague rustled through his desk in frustration, explaining the lost book was vital for a pressing order, Cha Dae-woo simply asked what he sought. Instead of finding it for him, Cha Dae-woo pointedly asked for the specific ticker symbol required. The colleague quickly named Juhan Software as the elusive stock. Without hesitation, Cha Dae-woo simply rattled off the correct ticker number, 23331, like it was common knowledge. His colleague was utterly stunned, wondering if Cha Dae-woo had somehow committed every single ticker to memory. Cha Dae-woo, with a confident smile, began to explain that it was more than mere memorization. This extraordinary perfect memory, the ability to recall every piece of information seen just once, was the sole redeeming quality of his former life as Jin-hu. Though once overshadowed by the severity of his autism, this remarkable capacity was now poised to become a profoundly useful asset in his new life. The sudden, urgent shout for Manager O cut through the office air. A female office worker, nervous and flustered, quickly stepped forward to offer her assistance. The client, a man in a blue suit, angrily bellowed that he should be allowed to choose his preferred employee. As the female worker nervously tried to explain Manager O's vacation, the client escalated his outburst, making a misogynistic remark and questioning her competence. The client further shamed her, dismissing her knowledge because she was a girl from a commercial high school. Jin-hu, observing the scene, reacted with growing internal annoyance. He critically observed the man in the blue suit, internally questioning how this lady could use such demeaning language about women when she herself was one. Jin-hu then wondered if this was Byun Sun-hee, and if she had been a significant figure in the original Cha Dae-woo's life. Contemplating a personnel record card for Byun Sun-hee, Jin-hu concluded that she must not have left much of an impression on the original Cha Dae-woo. The enraged client continued to loudly accuse the employee of arrogance. The female office worker, startled and trying to clarify, flinched back as a hand reached out towards her. Jin-hu intervened, smoothly addressing the client as "Madam," which surprised both the client and the female worker. With a confident smile and a slight bow, Jin-hu apologized and then flattered the client, confirming her identity as the chairwoman. The man in the blue suit, now visibly pleased, internally conceded that this young man certainly knew how to judge character. Slightly mollified, the man in the blue suit grudgingly acknowledged Jin-hu's intervention with a huff. The female office worker, Sun-hee, looked at Cha Dae-woo with a surprised and nervous expression. Cha Dae-woo reassured Sun-hee with a wink and a smile, telling her he would handle it and she just needed to input the orders. As Cha Dae-woo confidently gave a thumbs up, the man in the blue suit silently approved, deeming him a thoughtful young man. The man in the blue suit then extended his hand, placing an ID card onto a tray, instructing Cha Dae-woo to quickly process the transaction. Jin-hu recognized the client, recalling her from client cards at Jowa Securities. Jin-hu professionally inquired if the client wished to buy or sell, to which she responded she wanted to buy, and trusting a substantial amount this time. The client then cautiously revealed the amount was around 50 million won, glancing around suspiciously. Jin-hu inwardly calculated the significant investment that 50 million won represented for a middle-aged woman in 1993. As Jin-hu wrote notes, the client expressed a desire for a low-risk return that merely surpassed bank interest, which Jin-hu mentally categorized as risk-averse. When asked about the investment duration, the client surprisingly suggested a timeframe of about 10 years. Jin-hu then inquired if she had any preferred stocks in mind. The client, visibly annoyed, compared him to Manager O, who handled everything himself, and complained about being asked so many questions. Jin-hu nervously laughed, trying to professionally explain the importance of a client's own preferences. The client abruptly cut him off with an angry shout, demanding he simply buy something good. Jin-hu felt a surge of frustration, internally questioning if this lady truly thought buying stocks was as simple as shopping at a local mart. The narration clarified that despite stocks gaining popularity in the 1990s, it was an era severely lacking in both knowledge and advanced trading systems before the introduction of home trading. A stark contrast was drawn between modern, instant stock trading on a smartphone and the chaotic, in-person trading floors of the past, where phone orders or physical visits were the only options. Jin-hu, typing on the keyboard, inwardly noted that discretionary trading was the norm back then, so this situation was nothing new. He strategically decided on a stock level that would be significant enough to yield results but not so large as to attract undue suspicion. Jin-hu confidently presented his recommendation to the chairwoman: "How about investing in Daekyung Industries?" When the client inquired about the company, Jin-hu explained that Daekyung Industries dealt in wholesale, retail, and chemicals, promising that a 10-year investment would yield returns far exceeding her desire. Despite the client's skepticism and concern about bankruptcy, Jin-hu confidently reassured her, highlighting Daekyung Industries as a promising growth stock that steadily rose over 3 years and was a hidden champion that survived both the IMF and credit card crises. Narrating further, Jin-hu affirmed that Daekyung Industries had been strong even when conglomerates like Samsung were collapsing, then confidently predicted that a 50 million won investment would grow to at least 250 million. The client suddenly stood up, utterly shocked and excited by the prospect of 250 million won. She questioned his sincerity, but Jin-hu confidently countered that he had invested a huge amount himself, which convinced her to consider doing the same. An observing man in a suit, intrigued, let out a scoff at the mention of 250 million won from 50 million in 10 years. This man was Kang Han-sung, the branch manager of Jowa Securities' Gangdong branch, and he was amused by the bold rookie. Jin-hu instructed Sun-hee to place a buy order for 1,780 shares of Daekyung Industries at 28,000 won, which surprised her as the current price was 29,100 won. With a confident wink and a pointed gesture, Jin-hu insisted that the order would indeed execute at 28,000 won. The client praised his handsomeness and work ethic, then offered to set him up with some nice young ladies. Jin-hu politely declined, citing his rookie status, but the client, acknowledging his ambition, left him her card, urging him to call if he ever considered marriage. Leaning back in his chair, Jin-hu let out a deep sigh of relief. Holding the red card, Jin-hu reflected on the concept of marriage, recalling that the original Cha Dae-woo had also been married once. The narration painted a melancholic picture of the original Cha Dae-woo's past life, where he had 2 children and sent his wife and children to America for their education. He had remained in Korea alone, diligently earning money for his family's living expenses, reaching for his phone. The original Cha Dae-woo, disheveled and weary, answered a call from his wife. With a pained expression, he explained to his wife that it was 3 a.m. in Korea, questioning her late-night call. His wife, off-panel, abruptly demanded he hurry up and stamp the divorce papers, then send them to America. As the original Cha Dae-woo forlornly questioned the need for divorce, his wife, with another man partially visible, coldly pressed the issue. Cha Dae-woo's wife, lying in bed with another man, callously insisted they divorce quickly to avoid exhausting each other. She concluded their conversation by demanding child support for the children she would raise. Jin-hu grimaced, inwardly judging her as an absolute worst spouse. An announcement was then made to the assembled people on the trading floor. The announcement informed clients that the morning trading session had closed at 11:30 a.m. and instructed them to return at 1 p.m. Jin-hu efficiently aligned a stack of papers on his desk. A smiling colleague then approached, inviting Jin-hu to grab some food. The colleague casually mentioned the perk of free meals, thanks to having a good senior. Director Young Song-jin, leaning against a cubicle with a sinister smile, condescendingly told Jin-hu to consider himself blessed. A sudden realization struck Jin-hu. Director Young Song-jin was the original Cha Dae-woo's senior. Jin-hu recoiled internally at the thought of having lunch with Director Young Song-jin, expressing his disgust. Just as Jin-hu agreed to go to lunch with his colleague, Director Young Song-jin called out his name, interrupting their departure. Director Young Song-jin, confidently gesturing, asked to speak with Cha Dae-woo for a moment. Jin-hu, surprised and nervous, questioned why he was being called, which Director Young Song-jin internally found disrespectful for a rookie. Director Young Song-jin dismissively told the other colleague, Assistant Manager Young, to go ahead and eat, asserting that he would have lunch with Cha Dae-woo. As they walked together, Director Young Song-jin attempted to reassure Cha Dae-woo, complimenting his spirit while guiding him away. Jin-hu remained silent, his expression intense and thoughtful. The scene shifted to a lively street, featuring an everyday noodle shop. While eating noodles, Director Young Song-jin casually inquired about Jin-hu's parents' occupations. Jin-hu revealed his parents farmed in the countryside, confirmed he was the eldest son with 2 younger siblings, prompting Director Young Song-jin to internally wonder about his father's specific work. Director Young Song-jin, taking a drink, then directly and probing asked about Jin-hu's family's wealth. Jin-hu, looking down, internally reflected on the older generation's tendency to ask such intrusive questions. He thought of his family's humble background, possessing nothing he considered wealth beyond a crumbling thatched house and a modest plot of land in the countryside. Director Young Song-jin smiled, expressing understanding and stating that Jin-hu was tackling things head-on without any background, just like himself. Jin-hu, recalling Kang Han-sung's rise to branch manager despite lacking money or connections, then questioned Director Young Song-jin's self-assessment, complimenting him as the most influential person in the Gangdong branch. Director Young Song-jin, continuing to eat his noodles, simply dismissed the compliment, telling him not to start sucking up. Director Young Song-jin then posed a rhetorical question about the true most influential person in the Gangdong branch. Director Young Song-jin revealed that Manager Oh, the original account manager for the client Jin-hu just consulted, was the real power, which prompted Jin-hu to question why, when they had a branch manager. Jin-hu froze as Director Young Song-jin revealed Manager Oh Kyung-sik was the eldest son of the Oh Kyung group. Jin-hu's eyes widened in shock, noodles suspended mid-air, as Director Young Song-jin added that Oh Kyung Construction was their company's third-largest shareholder. Jin-hu's mind reeled, questioning why the eldest son of the Oh Kyung group would be at Jowa Securities, what needs they had, and when this connection began. Jin-hu, still processing, questioned the perceived power of the Oh Kyung group, noting that Oh Kyung Construction was classified as a mid-sized company. Director Young Song-jin, holding his chopsticks, corrected Jin-hu's perception, explaining that Oh Kyung's financial power was profoundly solid, far beyond what appeared on the surface. Director Young Song-jin further revealed ties between Oh Kyung and the company's owner family, explaining why Manager Oh held such power, which surprised Jin-hu. Director Young Song-jin then revealed talks of a marriage between the chairman's only son and the daughter of the Oh Kyung group, questioning if Jin-hu was unaware of such a significant detail. Jin-hu's face contorted in shock, a lightning bolt of realization striking him as he whispered the name of the Oh Kyung group's only daughter, Oh Jong-yun, who was, in fact, his fiancée. Current Cha Dae-woo wrestled with an existential crisis, realizing there was another Jin-hu in this timeline and questioning his own identity. He wondered if only his memories had transferred into Cha Dae-woo's body, then agonized over the fate of the original Jin-hu, Chairman Man-si's son, in this new timeline. A dizzying sensation overcame him as he contemplated the unsettling question of who now occupied his original body. In a psychological realm of memory, he pondered the profound question, which of them was the real Jin-hu, himself with the transferred memories, or the one born in this era? The man in the gray suit, interrupting his deep thoughts, pointed out that his noodles were getting soggy, asking if he needed half a day to eat. Current Cha Dae-woo quickly apologized for getting lost in thought, and the man reminded him to finish his meal as their lunch break was nearly over. He declared he was finished, placing his chopsticks down with a decisive clack. The man in the gray suit, offering to pay, directed him to gather his things so they could leave. As they stepped outside, the man in the gray suit abruptly brought up client Lee Young-ja's case, to which current Cha Dae-woo acknowledged. The man sternly explained that securing that agreement himself was a violation of an unspoken industry rule, insisting he should have postponed the contract until Manager Oh returned. When current Cha Dae-woo clarified if it made him look like he stole a client, the man confirmed, offering him a cigarette which he declined, and emphasized that performance agreements were everything in this field. Simply put, an agreement represented a securities company's vital performance record. Unlike ordinary companies where rank was king, securities firms revered performance, allowing high-achieving employees to even out-earn their managers. The man warned of the manager's nightmarish personality, stating he wouldn't simply overlook a client buying a random stock without his involvement. He offered to smooth things over with Manager Oh when he returned, swinging his arm dismissively and advising current Cha Dae-woo to just blame it on a rookie mistake. Current Cha Dae-woo asserted that it was not a mistake, causing the man to stop dead in his tracks. With conviction, he predicted that Daekyung Industries would close at 28,001 and reach the client's desired amount within 10 years. The man exhaled, expressing skepticism that the stock, having closed at 29,101 that morning, would drop by 1,101. He deemed it impossible. With a slight smile, the man lectured him that while youthful spirit was good, a rookie needed to understand the difference between confidence and recklessness to survive long-term. Taking a determined step forward, current Cha Dae-woo challenged him directly, what if he was right? He then proposed a deal, asking if the man would grant him a wish if his prediction came true. The man victoriously accepted, but with a condition: if he was right, current Cha Dae-woo would take over his overtime work for a while. Current Cha Dae-woo cheerfully agreed, bowing slightly. The chibi man in the gray suit joyfully anticipated freedom from overtime thanks to employee Cha Dae-woo, though a chibi current Cha Dae-woo hesitantly thought they would have to wait and see. As they walked, the man offered to buy him coffee if overtime kept him late, and current Cha Dae-woo politely thanked him. During afternoon overtime, a young man asked the branch manager to look at something, prompting the manager to inquire why. The branch manager was astonished, grasping for a confirmation that Daekyung Industries' afternoon closing price was indeed out and exactly 28,000 won. Current Cha Dae-woo confidently claimed his wish coupon, while the infuriated branch manager snapped that it was no time for jokes. Whispers filled the office with concern, anticipating Manager Oh's terrifying anger and wondering why the clueless rookie had dared to provoke him. Current Cha Dae-woo mused, realizing with a soft that Oh Kyung-sik's influence was far greater than he had initially thought. As a female office worker, Ms. Sun-hee abruptly offered to talk to Manager Oh for him. Current Cha Dae-woo, startled, tried to politely decline her over-the-top generosity. Ms. Sun-hee confidently justified her intervention, explaining that she was the one who placed the order and had met the manager before, so everything would be fine. Internally, current Cha Dae-woo was deeply touched by her concern, feeling immense gratitude for her worry. Ms. Sun-hee earnestly insisted it was nothing, reminding him of his past help with client service and stating she was simply returning the favor. A sudden ache and a flinch of surprise resonated deep within him. He questioned the unfamiliar sensation washing over him. Deep within his heart, a warmth spread, bringing an unfamiliar sense of ease and comfort. This unfamiliar feeling, he realized, was something he had never experienced as Jin-hu. Reflecting on his past as Jin-hu, he remembered his autism. His emotions back then had been far simpler, more straightforward than the complex feelings he now experienced. When he got what he wanted, he was simply happy. But when he didn't, he became explosively irritated. Even on the day his mother was seriously hurt right before his eyes, his father's distressed question echoed in his memory. He recalled that his sole feeling had been annoyance at the commotion. Cha Dae-woo's body, he mused with a sniff, processed emotions in countless ways, a revelation he found profoundly difficult. He suddenly realized he had gotten off work but had no home to return to, unable to recall Cha Dae-woo's address. A mental whirring began as chibi current Cha Dae-woo concentrated, determined to access his new body's memories. He recalled a small, shabby house on a hill, the last stop of bus 588, as Cha Dae-woo's first residence. With a hum of realization, he understood his first step was to take bus 588. He identified the device in his hand, a pager. He noted that in this era, with telephones still rare in households, wireless pagers, or beepers, were widely used. To use them, one would leave a phone number through the pager, and the recipient would call that number back. He answered the phone, identifying the location as Guro Gimbap. He then informed the operator that the paged individual was present, prompting the operator to connect the call. A voice on the other end, calling him "Brat," startled him. As the voice confirmed itself, asking if Appa could hear her, a bewildered chibi current Cha Dae-woo let out a gasp and began frantically calculating every possible outcome. He desperately tried to recall the specifics of Cha Dae-woo's family tree. A complex family tree unfolded in his mind, revealing Cha Dae-woo's parents and siblings. He hesitantly guessed In-ae, and his sister confirmed it, asking who else it would be. In-ae, Cha Dae-woo's sister, asked about his new assignment, while discreetly trying to keep the call short due to her busy kitchen work, and he replied, Gangdong branch, in Cheonhodong. With a sniffle, his sister expressed relief that his new assignment was close to his apartment, mentioned their worried parents, and urged him to call them when he had time. Flustered by her tears, current Cha Dae-woo questioned why she was crying and if his past autism prevented him from comprehending such emotions. He wondered if he should cry as well, just as his sister then revealed she had deposited 3 million won into his bank account. He questioned why she would give him such a huge amount of money, to which she replied he needed it for living expenses, but he still wondered where she had gotten it. Amidst the hurry and clatter of the kitchen, another woman informed his sister that the factory worker was there for her, signaling the start of her night shift, which she acknowledged. His sister reassured him not to feel pressure to pay her back, promised to care for their younger sibling, and abruptly ended the call, stating she had to return to work. He remained in thoughtful silence, pressing buttons on the phone after the call. A strange, hot sensation burned and wavered within his chest as he rode the bus. An aching throb filled him, a feeling so potent that tears threatened to spill, distinct from his drive for vengeance. This was. With a sniffle and a wipe of his eyes, he realized this was what a real family truly felt like. This was something Jin-hu never had, locked away with a clack, but Cha Dae-woo possessed it now. He was overwhelmed by the thought of a family that actually worried about him, rubbing at his eyes. The next day dawned. 2 colleagues confirmed Manager O had returned to work, one having seen him in the elevator. His expression was terrifying as he meticulously reviewed everything that had transpired during his vacation. A man bowed respectfully, greeting the passing manager. The female office worker observed that Manager O was in a foul mood once more. She explained that he became furious whenever another employee handled his clients, adding that it hurt his pride when someone invaded his territory. An indistinct voice worried if it was Cha Dae-woo, predicting that the rookie was done for. He diligently typed at his desk, the keys clattering. A swish heralded someone's approach, causing current Cha Dae-woo to look up abruptly. Director Young Song-jin's voice cut through, his question a demand, "So you're Cha Dae-woo?" His typing stopped abruptly, an internal thought confirming, "We finally meet." Director Young Song-jin angrily confronted him, having heard he handled client Lee Young-ja, while current Cha Dae-woo realized this meant Manager Oh Kyung-sik was now involved. With a click from his computer, Manager Oh Kyung-sik acknowledged that Jin-hu had handled client Lee Young-ja. Manager Oh, with a subtly smug expression, remarked, "Lucky you." He continued his condescending praise, detailing how Daekyung Industries stock had climbed non-stop to 32,000 won, mockingly asking if Jin-hu truly had an eye for stocks. Jin-hu, feigning fluster, humbly attributed his success to luck, as Manager O crumpled a document in his hand. Manager O's eyes narrowed sternly as he snapped that Jin-hu still needed to know his limits. A sharp smack echoed as Manager O shouted, accusing Jin-hu of telling a client a stock would rise for 10 years and running a scam operation. The oppressive weight of Manager O's words pressed down on Jin-hu, demanding to know what he would do if a complaint arose, and if he would take responsibility for everything. Behind his feigned distress, Jin-hu's eye held a new, steely determination. Then Jin-hu declared with resolute conviction that he would take responsibility, causing a collective flinch of surprise from his colleagues. A female office worker, perking up her ears, exclaimed in disbelief, wondering aloud if Jin-hu had lost his mind. Jin-hu then confidently pledged that if the stock failed to reach the promised amount, he would personally reimburse the client for the difference out of his own pocket. He then directly challenged Manager Oh Kyung-sik, asking if that would satisfy him. Manager Oh's jaw clenched, his teeth grinding in barely contained fury as he muttered, "Unbelievable." Manager Oh, with a mocking laugh, scorned Jin-hu's offer of compensation, accusing him of lacking basic industry ethics and scoffing at such a response from a rookie. Manager Oh then called out to Director Young Song-jin, who snapped to attention with an immediate reply. Manager Oh then expressed his serious concern about the state of their new hire training. Director Young Song-jin bowed deeply, immediately apologizing and promising to keep a closer eye on Jin-hu. Manager Oh dismissively refused the offer, stating their new employee would do just fine working all by himself. Two office workers whispered to each other, concerned about Manager O's usual tactics and what would happen to the rookie. The female office worker watched the unfolding scene with a growing sense of apprehension. She sighed, thinking that Jin-hu should have known when to stop. With a look of challenging amusement, Manager O then mockingly told Jin-hu to do his best on his own. Manager O glanced back with a menacing smirk, warning Jin-hu that he would be keeping a close eye on him. Jin-hu, brushing off his clothes, reflected on Manager O's dramatic scene and what he was truly planning. He looked out at the empty office, realizing Manager O was indeed going down that familiar, destructive route. This was the cruel path that had befallen Cha Dae-woo in his previous life. It began subtly, with incidents like being excluded from lunch, as a man in a blue suit with a red tie tapped documents and aggressively demanded why Cha Dae-woo hadn't prepared them. They systematically withheld work-related notices, leaving him out of crucial project meeting updates. At a meeting, an indistinct voice mentioned changing to Plan B, leaving the original Cha Dae-woo confused and leading the man in the blue suit to critically ask what had gotten into him lately. They meticulously crafted an environment designed for him to fail, constantly tearing down his self-esteem until he was trapped in suffocating despair. A foot stomped down on Cha Dae-woo's, as the man in the blue suit roared for him to get his act together. The man in the blue suit raged, accusing the trembling Cha Dae-woo of wasting company money and growing too comfortable without beatings. They relentlessly harassed and gaslight him, molding him into someone who would eventually move exactly as they desired. A foot cruelly crushed down on the back of Cha Dae-woo's head, leaving him cowering in brutal humiliation. This was the cruel, new hire hazing orchestrated by Manager Oh Kyung-sik's clique, as he and director Young Song-jin stood triumphantly over Cha Dae-woo. Originally, director Young Song-jin had been Cha Dae-woo's primary tormentor, even in social settings. But in this new timeline, Manager Oh Kyung-sik, with an intensely distorted face, was personally taking the lead. Jin-hu hummed thoughtfully, calculating that the change in tormentor might actually work out better for him. Amidst symbolic chaos and justice, a profound truth resonated: freedom was only for those who dared to risk the fall, a lesson Jin-hu knew well. Jin-hu reached purposefully for his suit jacket. As he walked away, donning his jacket with a confident thump, he knew this problem, too, would naturally solve itself. Adjusting his tie, Jin-hu contemplated the calendar, realizing the timing for his plans couldn't be more perfect. With a sinister smirk at a blood-splattered news report about Okyung trading on his laptop, Jin-hu wondered if he should start by damaging Manager Oh Kyung-sik's reputation. With purposeful footsteps, Jin-hu muttered, "First, Okyung trading," as he walked past a glass-doored office. The female office worker inside looked up with a curious, "Huh," as Jin-hu glanced back. Jin-hu leaned into the room with a smile, asking if she had not gone to lunch yet. She nervously confessed she couldn't stop thinking about him, causing Jin-hu to react with surprise. Jin-hu cautiously advised her not to talk to him, but she revealed her understanding, having experienced the new hire hazing herself. She interrupted his question, explaining her curiosity had driven her to speak with him, wanting to know what kind of person he truly was. As she clinked a coin into a vending machine, she reflected on her own past endurance compared to Jin-hu's defiant stand. She warned him that while his defiance was impressive, it was also dangerous, as Manager O wielded significant influence. Holding out 2 cans with a bright smile, she expressed her fervent desire to cheer him on, drawn to the thrilling, audacious rebellion she never had the courage to walk herself. She then offered her covert assistance, promising to help him however she could, even if not openly. Jin-hu silently acknowledged her generous offer with an appreciative gaze. The primary tormentor had indeed shifted, from Young Song-jin to Manager Oh Kyung-sik. Her hand passed a can of coffee to his, a silent gesture of support. Unlike his past life, now someone had appeared who genuinely supported him. Jin-hu, holding the coffee can, smirked, certain that Cha Dae-woo's future was now gradually changing because of him. He then addressed her by name, Sun-hee. But these changes were only the beginning, as Jin-hu, with an enticing smirk, asked, "Want to make a fortune?" This was only the beginning. The quiet hallway stretched past a closed glass office door. Sun-hee, seated, reacted with surprise, repeating, "Okyung Trading?" Jin-hu confirmed it was Okyung Group's parent company, prompting Sun-hee to ask if he was truly going to buy that stock. Jin-hu confidently declared his plan to gather as much capital as possible and go all in. Sun-hee observed his expectation for the stock to rise, but Jin-hu tapped his coffee can and corrected her, it would not just rise. With an intense grin, Jin-hu predicted it would skyrocket in a short period of time, leading Sun-hee to deduce he must have some insider information. Sun-hee then thoughtfully asked if she should hold the stock long-term. Jin-hu's instruction was precise, exactly 7 trading days later, sell it, which immediately prompted Sun-hee to question his timing. With a smirking revelation, Jin-hu explained the surge was temporary and event-driven, causing Sun-hee to realize they were discussing an Okyung Group event. With a sudden exclamation of understanding, she asked if it was due to the merger talks with Dae-woo Corporation. Jin-hu firmly cut her off, reiterating that once 7 trading days passed, she must sell every share of Okyung Trading, as that was all he could tell her. Sun-hee agreed, and Jin-hu further advised her to invest only part of her savings, assuring her that even then, the profit would be quite substantial. Jin-hu decisively declared she should use this Okyung Trading opportunity to judge for herself. Tapping his chest with a thump, Jin-hu challenged her to decide if he, the underdog, was someone worth supporting. Sun-hee reacted with a wide-eyed gasp of shocked realization. A murmur of voices broke the silence, prompting Sun-hee to gasp as Jin-hu turned towards the door. Jin-hu observed the returning office workers, noting that lunch break was almost over. He urged her to return before Manager Oh and his group, and she agreed, promising to clean up and follow. With a serious expression, Jin-hu instructed her not to put herself out front, but to blend in with Manager Oh's group and pass him any important information. Jin-hu acknowledged her discomfort but insisted she ignore him in front of others, to which she conspiratorially agreed, promising to smooth things over regarding their meeting. He then declared they should both do their best this afternoon, cementing their alliance. Sun-hee remained silent, lost in contemplative thought. Then she called out, "Dae-woo." With a grateful smile, she told him if she made a huge profit from Okyung Trading, she would like to repay him somehow. She shrugged confidently, stating she wasn't the type to live owing someone a favor. With a wink and a nod, she playfully suggested they forget Manager Oh and everything else, and instead, have a drink together. An unexpected wave of excitement swept through the office as surprising news brought an enthusiastic, "Wow, this is incredible," from a female colleague. The celebratory atmosphere surged as the man in the gray suit announced Okyung Trading stock had skyrocketed, with the man in the blue suit confidently adding, a 50% return in just 5 days. Gratitude filled the air as a female office worker bowed slightly, telling the manager how glad they all were to have followed his advice. The man in the gray suit recounted the manager's successful prediction from 5 days prior, reminding everyone he had foreseen Dae-woo Corporation's merger and the significant profits they would reap. Despite the general elation, the female office worker confessed to her initial skepticism, admitting she had doubted the tip when market rumors insisted the merger was dead in the water. Acknowledging his pivotal role, another office worker expressed awe, stating that without the manager's crucial insider information, no one in the office would have dared to buy those shares. A female office worker flattered the man in the blue suit, suggesting that sharing such a personal family matter for their benefit affirmed their bond as colleagues, emphasizing that family looks out for each other. As a female office worker delivered coffee, her expression remained startled, signaling an undercurrent of unease. The pointed comment from another female office worker, instructing Byun Sun-hee to thank the manager, caught her by surprise, prompting a hesitant, "Pardon?" The colleague pressed on, reminding Byun Sun-hee of her early departure that day, subtly implying she had missed crucial information that only the manager's intervention could have remedied. The full weight of the implication settled upon Byun Sun-hee, who realized she would have been the sole one to miss out on the valuable stock tip if not for the manager's perceived special effort. With a polite but strained tone, Byun Sun-hee affirmed her unwavering gratitude towards the manager. With a subtle tap of his paper cup, the man in the blue suit voiced his disappointment, hinting that a simple "thank you" was far from sufficient. His smirk hardened into a suggestive demand as the man in the blue suit requested Byun Sun-hee buy him a drink sometime. The pressure mounted on Byun Sun-hee as two colleagues eagerly urged her to treat the manager, reminding her of the substantial profits she had gained from the Okyung trading tip. Jin-hu, observing the scene, considered the profound obligation inherent in receiving a favor, knowing repayment was always expected. As he watched the interactions around the manager, Jin-hu's thoughts became hesitant, sensing a deeper game at play. Jin-hu fell deep into thought, his brow furrowed as he processed the unfolding office dynamics. With an unexpectedly loud and enthusiastic "good morning," Jin-hu announced his arrival, bowing deeply to his bewildered colleagues. His overly formal and energetic greeting continued to surprise his colleagues, who watched as Jin-hu enthusiastically stated his anticipation. Jin-hu concluded his surprisingly spirited morning salutation, declaring his readiness for the day. Colleagues reacted with a mixture of confusion and awkwardness to Jin-hu's uncharacteristic enthusiasm, wondering aloud why he was acting so suddenly out of character. Jin-hu strode confidently, declaring his immediate intention to dive into tasks, his internal chibi self cheering him on like an eager rookie. The female office workers' call, DAEWO, interrupted Jin-hu's focus, causing him to look up with a hint of surprise. With a warm smile and a decisive thumbs up, Jin-hu expressed his gratitude. A chibi Jin-hu enthusiastically reminded everyone about the upcoming team dinner to welcome their new recruit. An excited male office worker proposed an all-out drinking session to celebrate the weekend, while the man in the blue suit cast a displeased sideward glance, clearly unamused. Exhaustion hung heavy as two office workers complained about their overwhelming workload, suggesting the team dinner be postponed. The man in the blue suit sternly reprimanded assistant manager Shin, asserting that a welcome party was a time-honored tradition at the Gangdong branch. He then reminded a female office worker that her own welcome party had been held during the busiest time of the year, making his point undeniable. The female office worker attempted to voice a protest, but the man in the blue suit's unyielding stance left her words trailing off. The man in the blue suit hummed thoughtfully, considering the pushback. He firmly dismissed their complaints about being busy, stating that their duties required fulfillment regardless of their current workload. A tense exchange ensued as the man in the blue suit addressed Jin-hu, who met his gaze with a silent, serious intensity. Jin-hu slid his chair back and forth with a grating sound, agreeing completely with branch manager Kang Han-sung. Jin-hu asserted the necessity of attending the welcome party, then tapped his hand on the desk, adding a cynical remark about how long the new recruit would truly last. A subtle, knowing smirk played across Jin-hu's lips, revealing his deeper intentions. The man in the blue suit looked on, a thoughtful and slightly confused expression crossing his face. Two observing office workers commented on the strange tension and the branch manager's unusual behavior as he interacted with Jin-hu. The man in the blue suit erupted in hearty laughter, pleased by Jin-hu's response. With a pat on Jin-hu's back, the man in the blue suit praised him for truly understanding his perspective, the atmosphere jovial and seemingly friendly. Jin-hu's smirk turned sly as he laughingly suggested they all get absolutely hammered that night, his tone hinting at a hidden agenda. From off-panel, the man in the blue suit delegated the task of finding a team dinner venue to Assistant Manager Jung. Assistant Manager Jung enthusiastically saluted, agreeing to find a dinner location right away. As Assistant Manager Jung walked away, he cast a slight smirk over his shoulder, a hint of his own machinations. Jin-hu sat at his desk, nodding with a calm, knowing smile, his plans slowly unfurling. An off-panel voice boomed, encouraging unlimited ordering at the Daebak Galbi restaurant, promising the bill was covered. Inside the vibrant Korean barbecue restaurant, a worker responded affirmatively as meat sizzled invitingly on the grill. The lively atmosphere grew uneasy as Jin-hu stood abruptly, prompting a male office worker to ask where he was going. Feigning an urgent home emergency on his phone, Jin-hu's subtle smirk went unnoticed by a disappointed colleague. Resigned to the circumstances, other office workers expressed understanding and disappointment as a manager departed from the party. Two office workers gossiped about a manager's privilege to leave a team dinner, while current Jin-hu listened intently, absorbing their commentary. When a female office worker inquired about his departure, current Jin-hu quickly offered the excuse of needing to use the restroom. As he spoke, Jin-hu placed a note on the table, a subtle yet significant movement. The note, bearing instructions for a task mentioned days ago, caused a silent gasp of surprise from the female office worker. Current Jin-hu glanced back with a serious look, confirming the note's delivery. The female office worker nodded thoughtfully, a knowing expression replacing her initial surprise amidst the jovial background. Current Jin-hu walked away, his departure coinciding with the female office worker's quick reach for the note. A sly smirk played on the female office worker's face, indicating her thoughtful acceptance of the hidden directive. Outside the restaurant, two office workers observed current Jin-hu, questioning his unusual behavior. One office worker speculated if the rookie was the branch manager's nephew, only for another to dismiss the idea with an annoyed retort. Jin-hu explained his curiosity, noting that the branch manager was acting uncharacteristically, engaging in behaviors he never normally would. A vision of a mug spilling onto documents vividly depicted how the manager had consistently turned a blind eye to issues. In that illustrative memory, a man offered a flimsy apology for spilling a drink, annoying his colleague, all while current Jin-hu observed the feigned innocence. The narration highlighted the manager's past tendency to stand idly by, pretending to be oblivious to wrongdoing. The man in the blue suit turned his head away, his expression sullen and annoyed by the implications. With a sarcastic laugh, Jin-hu questioned the man in the blue suit's sudden change of heart, wondering what made him start defending someone now. The man in the blue suit's jaw clenched in anger as he accused Jin-hu of crossing the line and being drunk. With a deliberate flick of his foot, Jin-hu extinguished his cigarette, challenging the man's assessment with a calm, "Does it look that way to you?" Jin-hu's gaze sharpened as he addressed the branch manager, poised to deliver a cutting observation. His voice cold, Jin-hu declared that the branch manager's actions, with retirement a mere year away, seemed steeped in desperation. The man in the blue suit dismissed the comment with a decisive gesture, suggesting they simply continue as before, while another colleague bowed to a departing taxi. From inside the taxi, Jin-hu's voice turned malicious, threatening to use his future position at headquarters to convince the chairman to push back the branch manager's retirement by several years. As the taxi drove away with a rumble, the man in the blue suit bowed deeply, a gesture of deference watched by his colleague. The male office worker casually waved his hand, announcing his return inside, leaving the dejected man in the blue suit to his thoughts. The man in the blue suit, exhaling smoke, turned to current Jin-hu, asking if he had heard the manager's harsh words. His voice bitter and filled with resentment, the man in the blue suit blamed Associate Cha for the humiliation he was suffering so close to his retirement. Current Jin-hu offered a clearly insincere apology, prompting the man in the blue suit to accuse him of knowing exactly how things would unfold and orchestrating the entire situation. The man in the blue suit, with a look of resignation, revealed that his allegiance to Jin-hu had been a result of a bet. As Jin-hu walked away, his voice carried a rhetorical question about the consequences if his predictions proved correct. Turning with confident challenge, Jin-hu directly asked the man in the blue suit if he would grant him a favor then. The man in the blue suit warned Jin-hu that his favor was now used up and questioned his plan for facing Okyung as an enemy, but Jin-hu calmly reassured him not to worry. With a determined look and a slight smirk, current Jin-hu declared that the signal flare for their counterattack had already been fired. The sizzling of meat on a grill provided a stark backdrop as an indistinct voice cried out in shock, "What? Disbelief and disappointment rippled through the office workers as they learned Byun's son he had already sold her Okyung trading shares, lamenting what they believed was a waste of potential further gains. With a decisive tap, a female office worker placed a shot glass on the table, preparing to explain her reason for selling her Okyung trading shares. Smiling innocently, the female office worker challenged the others, asking if they would care to hear her explanation. Reading the newspaper, Jin-hu wondered if this new reality, this entire reversal of fate, could truly be happening. Other office workers reacted with surprise and confusion, questioning why the FTC was scrutinizing Okolung Group over its recent merger. This news directly contradicted the manager's earlier reassurances that the FTC and prosecutors would find no issues. As Jin-hu poured soju, he noted that other media outlets were also beginning to release related articles, escalating the situation. The female office worker shared her concern, having heard that the FTC was requesting merger documents again and preparing to summon executives for questioning. Concern quickly escalated into fear among the office workers, as they worried about executive questioning and a potential crash in the stock price. Amidst the murmuring conversations, Jin-hu observed the mounting anxiety in the room. Another office worker questioned if this was just a normal procedure, as their unease clattered around the table. The female office worker, however, confidently dismissed their fears, asserting that the FTC's actions were merely a formality to avoid negligence, and they would soon back off. Her words brought immediate relief to some, who desperately clung to the hope that the manager would inform them when to sell their stock. Exhale of relief. One male office worker gasped in surprise upon learning that the female office worker, Shin Young-suk, had already sold her Okyung trading stock due to the rumors. Shin Young-suk paused thoughtfully, her silence hinting at a deeper game. Jin-hu's request to her was simple, yet strategically significant. Jin-hu instructed Shin Young-suk to subtly stir the pot among their colleagues. As Jin-hu calmly lit a cigarette, he clarified that her task was simply to create enough doubt that people would question Manager Oh's earlier statements. Shin Young-suk expressed skepticism, pointing out that Okyung trading stock was currently skyrocketing, making it difficult to sow doubt. From an elevated perspective, Jin-hu dramatically emphasized that belief was irrelevant. The true point was to plant a seed of doubt in the minds of Oh Kyung-suk's loyalists. He elaborated that these people thought they could make easy money simply by following Manager Oh. But even a tiny bit of doubt could unravel that false sense of security, revealing a more ominous truth. Jin-hu reassured Shin Young-suk that she didn't need to overexert herself. He advised her to handle any awkwardness with flexibility. Shin Young-suk thanked Jin-hu, using the name Assistant Manager Shin Young-suk, as her hand clacked a glass against the table. Feigning timidity with a blush, Shin Young-suk claimed to be scared of losing money, calling it a real disaster if she did. Jin-hu responded with sarcastic amusement, remarking that he had no idea she was that kind of person, and there was nothing more he could say if she was satisfied with such meager profits. The other office workers looked on, silently gulping in bewildered surprise at the exchange. As Jin-hu flicked cigarette ash, he coldly stated that he couldn't be bothered caring about revenge. Outside, one male office worker advised his colleague to stop stirring up trouble and just coast comfortably until retirement, rustling his hand dismissively. Jin-hu looked on seriously, perhaps a grumbling thought echoing in his mind. The discarded cigarette butts in the ashtray suggested a long period of contemplation or a lingering tension in the air. Another male office worker confronted Jin-hu, questioning if he truly planned to leave so quietly. The office worker expressed concern, deeming the branch manager's forced retirement as unfair treatment. The angry male office worker lashed out, questioning Jin-hu's authority to judge company matters and sarcastically asking if he thought he was the chairman's son. Jin-hu ironically conceded that he technically was the chairman's son, then expressed his strong disapproval of the ridiculous personnel decisions regarding the branch manager and Manager Oh. As the male office worker listened, stunned, Jin-hu outlined his alternative vision, trusting a meritocratic branch manager and pursuing new possibilities. The male office worker laughed, flattered, dismissing Jin-hu's words as mere flattery, but Jin-hu firmly asserted his sincerity. Reaching out and squeezing the manager's hand, Jin-hu expressed his genuine desire for him to remain at the Gangdong branch. With a supportive pat, Jin-hu urged the manager not to give up, telling him not to surrender already. As he placed a small blue object into the manager's palm with a swoosh, Jin-hu suggested he might still have one last chance to burn brightly. Jin-hu bowed respectfully and excused himself, claiming he had been away from his desk too long, leaving the manager in silent contemplation. The male office worker, bewildered, scratched his head and wondered about Jin-hu's strange, incomprehensible words. His gaze fell upon the blue lighter in his hand, and he softly spoke its name, Chanji. Narration revealed that according to personnel records, branch manager Kang Han-sung would take early retirement a year later, a fate Jin-hu sought to prevent. Jin-hu, reflecting on the manager's value as he removed his shoes with a quick swoosh, decided that if he could bring Kang Han-sung to his side, he would become a reliable ally. Jin-hu tapped his shoes, deep in thought about the best approach for recruiting the manager. Suddenly, water splashed onto Jin-hu's shirt with a splat, and Shin Young-suk quickly asked if he was all right. Shin Young-suk apologized profusely for accidentally soaking his shirt. Feigning a blush and slight intoxication, Shin Young-suk attempted to excuse her clumsiness by claiming she drank too much while trying to sober up. Jin-hu inwardly recognized her classic move, but verbally dismissed the incident, while she offered to pour him good drinks as an apology. Shin Young-suk flirtatiously invited him to wait at her table for a bit, while Jin-hu internally mused on how easily the original Cha Dae-woo must have fallen for such a simple tactic. Jin-hu agreed, addressing her by her full title, Assistant Manager Shin Young-suk. He recalled that his father's personnel records for Jowa Securities showed Assistant Manager Shin Young-suk's profile as almost boringly simple. But, Shin Young-suk from Cha Dae-woo's memories, was a horrifying revelation, as Jin-hu poured soju. She was a snake-like woman, obsessed with success and ambition, devouring every resource around her, as the original Cha Dae-woo drank heavily. To Shin Young-suk, the dogged employee Cha Dae-woo was nothing more than ideal prey, and in exchange for a single night, he ended up mortgaging the rest of his life to her. The narration ominously paused, hinting at a grim conclusion to their story. The original Cha Dae-woo's wife coldly demanded a divorce over the phone, eager for them to go their separate ways. And this day was precisely when the drunken original Cha Dae-woo went to a motel with Shin Young-suk, as he stood dejectedly. Shin Young-suk leaned impatiently towards Jin-hu, declaring she had been waiting forever. Aggressively, Shin Young-suk insisted that Jin-hu would not be going home until he finished all the alcohol she brought. Jin-hu expressed concern over the excessive amount, but Shin Young-suk dismissed it, insisting it was the minimum he had to drink. With a wide smile, Shin Young-suk taunted Jin-hu for being scared before even trying, pouring a large drink into a mug. A young woman nervously whined, expressing concern about assistant manager Shin's recurring pattern of pushing strong drinks on new male hires, wondering if Jin-hu would be alright. An off-panel voice dramatically announced Shin Young-suk's special welcome drink was complete, as it was presented with a clang. Jin-hu nervously accepted the large mug, offering a forced, thank you, as Shin Young-suk urged him to chug it. Shin Young-suk watched him with a sinister smile, her anticipation evident. Jin-hu prepared to drink from the glass. He took a sip from the glass. Shin Young-suk observed him with a narrow-eyed smirk. An off-panel voice called out for Cha Dae-woo, causing a surprised stir among the office workers. A male office worker identified himself as Cha Dae-woo and informed Jin-hu that he had a phone call. Jin-hu quickly agreed to take the call, while Shin Young-suk frowned in irritation, wondering who dared to call at such an inconvenient time. The male office worker spoke on the phone, agreeing to something and stating he'd be there soon. He explained that the call was from the branch manager, whose father had unexpectedly arrived from the countryside. Shin Young-suk, surprised, asked about his hometown, to which he replied, Danyang. She noted the considerable travel distance, and the male office worker confirmed his need to leave immediately. A male office worker waved his hand, allowing him to leave, but Shin Young-suk angrily protested, reminding everyone that it was Jin-hu's welcome party. The female office worker, still fuming, was told that family obligations took precedence. Jin-hu thanked the male office worker with a bow, who then urged him to hurry and leave, much to Shin Young-suk's continued displeasure. Shin Young-suk ground her teeth in furious frustration, gripping her shirt. The brightly lit building, Chonji Dabong, stood under the cool glow of the moonlight. Jin-hu handed the woman behind the counter the remaining payment, who expressed pleasant surprise at the generous amount. The woman asked if Jin-hu had truly kept his promise, and he confirmed it, stating he was the one who had asked for the favor, a lighter clattering. Jin-hu thanked the woman for making the crucial phone call. Jin-hu confidently thanked the boss for helping him avoid a huge crisis and promised to frequent the establishment more often from now on. Jin-hu weighed a critical decision, wondering if he should entrust this crucial task to Se-in-hee. He meticulously analyzed the organizational chart, realizing the welcoming ceremony offered the perfect strategic opportunity. Jin-hu mused, realizing the timing was ideal to sow seeds of doubt among Oh Kyung-sik's allies, once more contemplating Se-in-hee's involvement. His mind raced, calculating the repercussions of using Kang Han-sung to draw out Oh Kyung-sik, knowing he had to monitor that development closely. Yet, despite all the moving pieces, Jin-hu knew the female office worker whose portrait he focused on was the one he truly needed to watch most carefully. His internal warning persisted, however, confirming his need to be most wary of a certain individual in the office. With his primary allies currently occupied, Jin-hu understood he needed to orchestrate another carefully planned move. Jin-hu stretched with a satisfied hum, pleased that his strategy was falling into place, gaining a perfect hideout exactly when he needed one. A few days later, after work, he scoured the area around the company and easily found a suitable spot. He settled on a cafe near Daebeek Galbi that was struggling and easily overlooked, with low foot traffic. From that day on, Jin-hu ensured his presence was noted every time he entered the cozy cafe after work. He greeted the owner warmly, ordering expensive desserts and coffee as he settled in. He cultivated an image of diligent study, always mindful not to outstay his welcome. As he prepared to leave, the cafe owner called him over with a knowing glance. The cafe owner offered a freshly steamed, warm rice cake, a thoughtful snack from her husband. She kindly packed the rice cakes for him, showing her growing fondness for the young man who lived alone. Jin-hu tried to pay for the kind gesture, but the cafe owner insisted it was a gift for a hardworking young man like him. Though he protested, the owner emphatically waved off his attempts to pay, declaring it was fine. The cafe owner gave a subtle, shrewd glance as Jin-hu, off-panel, questioned her persistence. Jin-hu then surprised her, revealing he had a favor to ask, suggesting the rice cakes were a deposit for his request. He then politely asked if he could borrow the cafe's phone the following day. The next morning, the office buzzed with congratulations for Section Chief Oh Kyung-sik. Chief Oh walked confidently through the hallway, accepting congratulations on his promotion to headquarters. An enthusiastic office worker bowed, congratulating him on his impending transfer, while Chief Oh simply asked for the morning newspaper. As the female office worker approached him with flowers, colleagues murmured about the significance of his promotion to HQ from their branch. The female office worker called out to Chief Oh, asking him not to forget them, as a phone rang loudly. Jin-hu answered the phone, identifying the Jowa Securities Gangdong branch and offering assistance. The female office worker frowned in irritation, wondering who dared to call so early in the morning. The phone continued to ring insistently. Across the empty office, multiple phones rang simultaneously and relentlessly. Jin-hu pondered the persistent calls, wondering what was happening, as the narration asked when one felt the deepest sense of betrayal. A panicked male office worker urgently informed Chief Oh that something terrible had happened. The narration emphasized that in true betrayal, there was no stage of doubt or denial. The man in gray suit gasped, staring at the shocking front-page news, Oh Kyung Group, raided by prosecutors. The betrayal hit with such force that it left no room for anything but burning rage. Shocked office workers reacted to the news of the raid, immediately concerned about the plummeting stock price of Ojiang Industrial. The man in gray suit stared at the newspaper, his mind reeling as he connected the raid to Chief O's upcoming transfer, sensing a deeper plot. The narration revealed that the office workers' internal suspicions were about to be confirmed. A male office worker angrily voiced the growing suspicion that their chief had intentionally orchestrated this, a thought that suddenly felt terrifyingly real to everyone. Jin-hu revealed that all he had planted was a tiny, unassuming seed. But that seed would blossom into a deadly flower, becoming the very trigger that would bring down Ojiang-sik's entire kingdom. Jin-hu felt his phone vibrating urgently in his pocket. The man in gray suit answered his phone, only to be met with an urgent demand to return home immediately. Confused, the man in gray suit tried to explain he was at work, but his father angrily cut him off, demanding his immediate return as colleagues whispered in the background. The man in gray suit swallowed hard, his face etched with conflict before reluctantly agreeing. A male office worker called out in surprise as the man in gray suit abruptly rushed away. The man in gray suit hastily bumped into a male office worker as he sped off. The male office worker, frustrated by the sudden chaos, declared company discipline had collapsed and ordered O's monthly report to be completed and placed on his desk. A male office worker frantically reported the disastrous state of Ojiang Industrial stock, which the man in gray suit grimly confirmed, noting the swarming customers earlier. The man in gray suit angrily questioned his team about recommending the stock, causing them to flinch nervously. He sighed, rubbing his head in exhaustion, and instructed his team to set aside personal matters and focus. The man in gray suit ordered the security guards to stay sharp, anticipating trouble from the noisy crowd outside. He grimly warned his employees that it would be the most grueling day of their lives. A furious voice from the agitated crowd demanded their money back. A furious crowd of clients stormed the office, shouting demands for their money back and violently throwing papers. A male office worker gasped, utterly terrified and overwhelmed by the sheer hell of the chaotic situation. Angry clients yelled that Oh Kyung was going down and demanded immediate responsibility, while a male office worker frantically tried to calm them. Dozens of clients swarmed in, screaming for the company's collapse, while employees broke into a cold sweat attempting to pacify their rage. The narration revealed that the employees' rage toward Ojiang-sik must have swelled like a snowball, fueled by the intense emotional labor they endured. The male office worker grimaced, clenching his teeth in pure rage as he muttered Chief Oh Kyung-sik's name. Jin-hu and Jin-hee clinked glasses, with Jin-hee expressing genuine surprise at Oh Kyung Industrial's sudden collapse. Jin-hee asked Jin-hu how he knew about the raid, to which he simply smirked and replied he had stuck to the basics. Jin-hu explained his philosophy on stock trading, emphasizing the importance of reading social trends, atmosphere, and economic indicators over mere insider information. Narration clarified that insider trading, once possible in the 90s, was now strictly illegal and unthinkable in the 2000s. Jin-hu, surprised, paused with food on his chopsticks, realizing he needed to correct something he had just said. An off-panel voice poured soju, reflecting on their earlier underestimation of Dae-woo. The off-panel speaker corrected himself, acknowledging Dae-woo's true potential to entirely turn their branch around. Jin-hu grimaced, feeling his chest tighten, and declared he would soon stop bothering Dae-woo, noting how employees had been cursing the chief. An off-panel voice credited Jin-hee for the success, to which Jin-hee humbly replied she only followed instructions. As soju was poured, Jin-hu expressed that having someone who truly listened to him had been an immense strength. Jin-hu thanked Jin-hee for her unwavering trust. Jin-hee cleared her throat, her expression serious, and asked Jin-hu about his future plans. Jin-hu reflected on Chief O's impending transfer to HQ, but knew his unpredictable personality meant he could cause more trouble before then. Jin-hu confidently declared he would make his own move, startling Jin-he. With the urgent matters settled, the narration declared it was now time to prepare in earnest for what lay ahead. Jin-hu revealed his plan to be based in the US for that event happening in a few months. Jin-hu smirked, confirming his intention to capitalize on that event. Jin-he asked for clarification, to which Jin-hu replied he was simply looking forward to tomorrow, surprising her further. Jin-hu gave a confident, mischievous smirk, confirming that something very interesting would indeed happen tomorrow. The scene transitioned to an exterior view of the modern office building bathed in the bright morning sun. Jin-he reacted with shock to the news of a New York training program. A male office worker announced that a reward directive for the training had come directly from headquarters. The narration detailed the criteria. Employees with top client retention and return on assets through June would be selected for financial training at an affiliated New York firm. The male office worker encouraged everyone to strive for the training, highlighting that all expenses would be covered, along with paid leave upon completion. Employees reacted with whispers and shocked expressions as the exciting announcement spread. Jin-hu subtly smirked, recognizing this as the golden opportunity to strip the Oh-kyung group of their illicit slush fund. 1 month after the Oh-kyung trading crash, days of relentless work kept coming, leaving no time to even catch their breath. As the Oh-kyung trading stock plummeted further, clients' anger boiled over, forcing them to hold dawn meetings and meticulously pick rising stocks to regain lost trust. Even with overtime becoming the new normal, staff morale surprisingly never dropped, and the true reason lay hidden beneath the surface. As he scratched his head in annoyance, one office worker thought he would have dumped the grunt work on someone else ages ago, if not for the looming training evaluation. The coveted U.S. training had turned the Gangdong branch into a war zone without bullets, with everyone fiercely fighting for that single prize. A man clapped his hands decisively, telling everyone to take a breather after being so fired up. He announced that the clients had calmed down a bit, and urged the office workers to start taking turns using their vacation days. With a startled sound, he specifically told Jin-hu that he was taking leave first. Jin-hu reacted with a confused sound, questioning why he, the newest member, was suddenly singled out for vacation, warning that such relentless work would lead to collapse. Forced into taking a vacation, Jin-hu now found himself rattling along on a train, headed back to his hometown. With a thoughtful hum, Jin-hu watched as a young woman offered him a peeled egg on the train. She explained with a warm smile that she had peeled all the shells just for him. The young woman then pointed to the salt, prompting Jin-hu to gratefully thank her. Jin-hu held the perfectly peeled egg in his hand, a pensive thought settling over him about the nature of Cha Dae-woo's family. As he quietly ate the egg, Jin-hu pondered what kind of people they truly were. Jin-hu sighed, expressing his weariness as the walk seemed impossibly far. When Jin-hu asked how much longer they had to walk, the young woman estimated about 40 minutes more. With an excited, "Oh," the young woman pointed and asked Jin-hu if he remembered that house, surprising him. The young woman reminisced about how jealous they were in school of the kids who lived there, to Jin-hu's clear confusion. Fondly recalling the warm fried eggs in those kids' elementary school lunchboxes, she admitted her intense jealousy, again met by Jin-hu's bewildered response. She explained with a heartfelt smile that she always wanted to succeed, so she could someday make lots of fried eggs for Jin-hu and their little brother. Jin-hu realized that was why she had bought so many eggs. With a sniffle, the young woman expressed her happiness at finally being able to fulfill that wish, even if it was late, as Jin-hu listened silently. Jin-hu gently patted the young woman's head and suggested they give their parents 2 fried eggs each. He smiled kindly, encouraging her to personally make them nice and hot for their parents. The young woman looked up, her eyes welling with tears, utterly speechless at his unexpected kindness. With a joyful cry of, "Yeah," she wiped a tear from her eye, her face alight with a happy smile. The young woman, holding up the egg carton and bag, joyfully called out for her parents. As the gate creaked open, her father welcomed their eldest home, inviting them inside with a warm smile. The young woman embraced her mother, who worried she must be tired from the trip, while her father playfully chided her for coming out while so busy. The older man, concerned, questioned Jin-hu about his company and work, but Jin-hu reassured him of his well-being, prompting the young woman to intervene. The older woman clapped her hands with surprise and excitement, eagerly inviting them inside to eat, mentioning how hungry they must be. As Jin-hu looked around, the young woman excitedly told him they had slaughtered a chicken since he was coming, lamenting that Young-woo, who also loved chicken, was in the army. Jin-hu observed the humble exterior of the rustic backyard, wondering if this was truly Cha Dae-woo's home. He looked around with surprise, thinking the house was even more run-down than he remembered, when the older woman's voice called out to him. The family warmly welcomed Jin-hu, urging him to hurry in and eat, as he silently took his seat at the low table. Jin-hu froze in the doorway, clearly startled by something he saw or remembered. In a stark contrast, a man with his back to the viewer encouraged someone to eat a lavish meal set on a formal dining table. A man in a suit informed a young man that his presence there was by the chairman's orders, in a grand and oppressive room. The young man looked utterly shocked and afraid, sitting isolated at the long table. Jin-hu gasped, a sudden, intense memory or realization contorting his face in shock. From the doorway, the young woman, full of concern, asked Jin-hu if he was all right. Jin-hu explained with a pensive expression that he had simply remembered something from his past. Stepping onto the porch, Jin-hu then urged everyone to eat, as the food was getting cold. His father encouraged him to eat after his long trip, while the young woman prompted her mother, who insisted she was full just watching them. Jin-hu placed his hand on the table, preparing to address his parents. Clearing his throat, Jin-hu then asked his parents if they were free the following day. After his father confirmed they had no special plans, Jin-hu proposed they all go into Jecheon City in the morning. His parents and the young woman, curious, asked, what for, to which Jin-hu simply replied that he had a present for them. His father admonished him for spending money, insisting he should be saving for marriage, but Jin-hu confidently explained that bonuses at a securities firm were larger than base salary. Jin-hu confidently added that he had also made a decent amount separately from his stock investments. He humorously illustrated with a bar graph that his stock earnings far surpassed his salary and bonuses, surprising his mother with the potential of stocks. His mother lovingly insisted that his health and well-being were her only present, but Jin-hu gently insisted they come with him anyway, promising a refund if they disliked the gift. The young woman, intrigued, asked Jin-hu when he had even bought the gift, pressing him for a hint. Jin-hu dismissed it as nothing big and just something modest he had prepared, leaving the young woman smiling with anticipation. The young woman looked up in utter shock, struggling to articulate her surprise. She shouted in disbelief, questioning how Jin-hu could possibly call the tall apartment building modest. His parents and the young woman were overwhelmed at the sight of an apartment in downtown Jecheon, as Jin-hu calmly prepared to sign the papers. His mother desperately reached out, grasping Jin-hu's hand and vehemently refusing to live in such a grand place. Shaking with worry, she asked how they could live in a house their son had to take out a loan for, but Jin-hu calmly assured her there was no loan and he had paid in full. His mother and father looked utterly stunned by Jin-hu's revelation that he had bought the apartment with only 1 month's earnings. Jin-hu, with a confident smile, promised to send them living expenses every month, urging them to live comfortably there, which deeply moved his mother to tears. Jin-hu gently guided his mother, inviting his family to look around inside the new apartment. The young woman exclaimed in awe, as the family stood visibly excited and amazed upon entering the modern, bright apartment. Narration revealed that this money was originally intended for revenge, but a phone call during his vacation prompted Jin-hu to reconsider. The young woman, Cha Dae-woo, asked over the phone if Jin-hu wanted to go back home together during his break. Cha Dae-woo told him their parents really wanted to see him, and promised to take care of all the gifts. Cha Dae-woo was startled when an off-panel voice urgently called her, reminding her they were slammed. She quickly apologized to Jin-hu and ended the call, urging him to think about her suggestion. Jin-hu stood alone in a phone booth, having just hung up the receiver. He stood silently, holding the phone, deep in thought after the call. Narration declared that there was one more goal as important as revenge to Jin-hu, as his family happily explored the apartment. That goal was the happiness of Cha Dae-woo and his family, who were now smiling contentedly within their new home. The family continued to beam happily, with Jin-hu watching them from a distance. If his family could live in comfort, then Jin-hu would feel a true sense of peace. Jin-hu placed his hand on his chest. If warmth could settle into his heart, then it would be a triumph. Cha Dae-woo called out to Jin-hu, her hand extended in an inviting gesture. Cha Dae-woo waved and invited Jin-hu to join them in enjoying the view, as his parents smiled beside her. Jin-hu looked pensive, taking in the heartwarming scene. He took a step forward, moving towards his family. Jin-hu thought that this much money was truly nothing compared to their happiness, as he walked towards his family. Meanwhile, the imposing headquarters of the Okyung Group stood under a dark, cloudy sky. In a large, elegant office, Cha Dae-woo reported that despite some initial difficulties, he had managed to handle most issues before heading to Jowa Securities HQ. The man in gray suit seriously warned Cha Dae-woo to keep his head straight at HQ and avoid another incident like Okyung. The man in gray suit acknowledged his father's warning and sternly reminded someone named Kyungsik that time was running out. A woman looking out a high-rise window mentioned that he would be visiting Gapyeong soon. The man in gray suit leaned forward with a sinister smile, instructing that Jowa Securities must be brought completely under their control before that happened. Jin-hu worked late into the night, the persistent whirring of the fluorescent lights accompanying his unwavering focus. His fingers clacked purposefully across the keyboard, driven by an unseen urgency. On the screen, a message blinked, asking if the crucial business account was ready, the keys thumping with anticipation. A crisp ding signaled confirmation. Mikey had everything ready, including the EIN and LLC documents. Jin-hu exhaled a satisfied, perfect, a quiet laugh escaping him as he lauded his contact's efficiency. He instructed Mikey to hold until his arrival in the U.S., a directive the contact acknowledged with an obedient, "Okay, boss." Jin-hu stretched, a small groan escaping him as he realized the true cost of establishing a company in the U.S. Only one step remained, a fax to Switzerland tomorrow would finally resolve that lingering problem. A female office worker, observing a mountain of documents, offered to help with the shredding. The male worker indicated he was about to shred documents himself, receiving polite permission to proceed. Jin-hu's gaze sharpened on a fax, quickly deducing from the +1 country code it was US-bound, and wondered aloud if it was sent to an acquaintance. With a playful "shoo," Jin-hu hinted at deeper mysteries, declaring it a secret even from you, Ms. Sun-hee. The insistent ringing of a phone echoed through the office. The phone continued its insistent ringing, prompting the male worker to excuse himself from Ms. Sun-hee. Jin-hu answered the phone with a click, and the voice on the other end confirmed receipt of his urgent fax from Credit Suisse. He calmly instructed the transfer, and the voice on the line immediately requested his customer number and PIN. Jin-hu rattled off the precise customer number and PIN, the pen tapping against his notepad with confident finality. His identity verified and account checked, the voice on the phone moved to the next critical step, specifying the transfer amount and destination. He confidently named Bank of America and a staggering $10 million for the transfer, the amount whooshing past. The off-panel voice declared the transfer complete, ending with a professional thank you. Jin-hu gently thumped the receiver back into its cradle, the transaction now complete. A satisfied humph escaped Jin-hu as he acknowledged his funding problem was finally, decisively solved. A surge of annoyance rippled through Jin-hu, as he admitted to himself that he truly hadn't wanted to use these funds. He sighed, the irony heavy, knowing this was none other than Chairman Zhou Manjiai's money. These were the secret Swiss deposits of Chairman Zhou Manjiai, an emergency fund for his disabled son's future, kept hidden even from his own wife. In his past life, only he and Chairman Zhou Manjiai knew of the account's existence, but with his own death, the massive sum within it vanished into the shadows. Ultimately, it was the Ojiang family who had indirectly buried the account and its precious funds. He tried to rationalize it was his own money now, but a bitter laugh escaped him, the thought of spending Chairman Zhou Manjiai's painstakingly saved funds feeling utterly gross. A tap on his shoulder jolted Jin-hu from his thoughts, as a man in a gray suit inquired if he had heard the latest. The female office worker relayed significant news. Section Chief Oh Kyung-sik was starting at the headquarters that very day. She expressed disbelief that Oh Kyung-sik kept his headquarters transfer despite never showing up since the Ojiang scandal, to which Jin-hu merely replied, "Well, he is from the Ojiang family, after all." She further revealed that the Ojiang-Mulsan issue was supposedly resolved by an outrageous influx of money, a tactic so bold, even conglomerates wouldn't dare try. The female worker wondered aloud about the seemingly endless source of Ojiang's funds, prompting Jin-hu to speculate that their ancient origins might conceal a hidden financial reserve. Jin-hu's curiosity sparked as he questioned how truly ancient the Ojiang group was. The female worker thoughtfully recalled that Ojiang stood as one of the country's oldest surviving companies. Ojiang's roots stretched back to the Japanese colonial period, starting as nothing more than a small shop. After liberation, they experienced explosive growth, swiftly transforming into the mid-sized company they were known as today. A sudden realization dawned on Jin-hu, and he wondered, then Ojiang Mulsan is. The office erupted in shocked exclamations as the disheveled branch manager stumbled in, his ragged appearance prompting colleagues to question if he'd encountered thugs. The branch manager pointed an accusing finger, his face contorted in anger. The branch manager vehemently demanded if Jin-hu had caused some kind of accident, a bewildered Jin-hu quickly denying it. The branch manager, utterly exasperated, demanded to know why clients were lining up specifically, just to see you. The branch manager vividly recounted his desperate escape, having been swarmed by a chaotic crowd of clients, all demanding the attention of Section Chief Cha Dae-woo. The branch manager, frustrated, admitted he wasn't sure what was happening, as Jin-hu let out a long, crackling sigh of annoyance. The branch manager, taking charge, assigned Jin-hu to teller duty for the entire day, instructing him to review all client transaction histories before the morning session. Jin-hu confidently declared, "It's fine," revealing he had already memorized everything from the compiled report days ago. The branch manager reacted with incredulous fury, accusing Jin-hu of joking at such a critical moment. Jin-hu humphed softly, a contemplative irritation crossing his face as he wondered if he truly had to prove himself. Jin-hu, with a clear clap for emphasis, began reciting precise details. Client Jo Sung-hoon, handled by assistant manager Shin Young-suk, had purchased Myri Electronics, Sangkwang Industry, and Blue Solution, totaling roughly 100 million won. Without missing a beat, Jin-hu continued, listing client Bae Eugene's purchases of bio and pharmaceutical stocks such as Genolife, BioHel Farm, and Infect. He then provided even finer detail. Client Lee Jun-hyuk, on the 14th, bought 30 shares of Hanbit Tech at 125,000 won, known for his preference for IT growth stocks. As the branch manager frantically flipped through the documents, his stunned voice could only confirm, "He's exactly right." The female office worker, equally stunned, confirmed it. His memory matched the client cards and transaction histories perfectly. Murmurs swept through the office, workers questioning, how is that even possible, and quickly labeling him a genius, remembering his reputation as the top recruit. The branch manager, his face a mask of shock, could only utter a bewildered, "He really remembers all of that. But how?" With a knowing smirk, Jin-hu modestly claimed he merely had a fairly exceptional memory. With a light-hearted chuckle, a chibi Jin-hu cheekily requested support personnel since he only had one body, prompting the exasperated branch manager to good-naturedly call him a punk. The branch manager swiftly assigned Ms. Byun Sun-hee to support client reception, which she immediately acknowledged with obedience. The branch manager then ordered employee Ko and employee Kim to immediately manage the absolute chaos of the client line, which now stretched all the way to Chonho intersection. Jin-hu mentally acknowledged the branch manager's quick and effective response, concluding he hadn't climbed to his position for nothing. The branch manager then briskly ordered Jin-hu to his teller window, and Jin-hu affirmed he would be right there. Jin-hu diligently stacked a thick pile of documents, offering a polite, "Thank you for waiting." Jin-hu introduced himself as Cha Dae-woo from the Gangdong branch, only for the client to immediately ask, "Are you Section Chief Chadaewo?" Jin-hu clarified his actual rank, but the client vehemently retorted, "What does your rank matter?" claiming his name had the whole town is in an uproar. The client excitedly relayed the rumors, claiming Jin-hu had grown someone's money by 40% in just 2 weeks and navigated the Ojeong-Molson crisis with uncanny skill. The client, his voice rising in praise, emphasized that Jin-hu alone had avoided recommending Ojeong-Molson, leading to widespread rumors of his magic touch. Jin-hu returned a broad smile, offering a simple "thank you" for the glowing praise. The client's tone abruptly turned cautious, warning that chairman was now keeping a close eye on Jin-hu, prompting Jin-hu to inquire who he meant. The client, in a hushed tone, revealed the name, the Godfather, Chairman Han Myung-Gook. The client, his gaze intense, warned Jin-hu to be careful, as rumors claimed this big shot of the private loan industry now had his formidable eye on him. Jin-hu's mouth curved into a knowing smirk, as he feigned ignorance, wondering aloud what reason Chairman Han Myung-gook could possibly have to keep an eye on him. With a confident, almost sinister smile, Jin-hu declared a keen desire to meet this Chairman Han Myung-gook at least once. Jin-hu found himself eerily reminded of a game he once played, as the chaotic office buzzed with overwhelmed clients. The overwhelming situation brought to mind a specific game from before his return, a chilling echo of his new reality. He remembered a generic zombie defense mobile game from his past life, the kind that filled early smartphone advertisements. After 6 grueling hours of consultations, the relentless stream of customers blurred into endless waves of zombies, pressing on his very soul. Just as he braced himself, gasping for breath, believing he had finally reached his absolute limit, a wave of exhaustion washed over him. A sharp cry escaped him, a raw sound of desperate struggle. Finally, the afternoon session concluded, leaving Jin-hu feeling utterly ragged and drained. The man in gray suit chuckled, praising Jin-hu and the female office worker as his lucky charms for their outstanding efforts. He enthusiastically declared that Jin-hu had single-handedly achieved their entire branch's daily AUM target. The man in gray suit, in a burst of joy, thumped Jin-hu, proclaiming he had saved them from the Okeong trading crash, to which Jin-hu modestly replied he was glad to hear it. Assistant Manager Young, startled by the man in blue suit's booming voice, quickly affirmed he was indeed Jin-hu's trainer and would help carry the client files. As they scurried, Assistant Manager Young pressed Jin-hu on his secret, but Jin-hu only offered a non-committal, "Who knows?" The man in blue suit, still laden with files, eagerly proposed a celebratory round of drinks to the branch manager. The man in gray suit firmly rejected the idea of drinks, anticipating another busy day, and instead sent Jin-hu and Ms. Byun Sun-hee home to rest, sparking whispers among their colleagues about Jin-hu's mysterious transformation. The female office worker voiced her concern about unfinished paperwork, but the man in blue suit insisted it was their responsibility to finish it, recognizing her and Jin-hu's immense contributions. The man in gray suit declared their lucky charms shouldn't concern themselves with leftover work, urging them both to get some much-needed rest. He gleefully announced he would be counting on his utterly exhausted lucky charms again tomorrow. As they walked, both Jin-hu and the female office worker shared a laugh of disbelief, still processing the day's extraordinary events. Jin-hu called out to Ms. Sun-hee, who looked to him with a curious hum. With a confident smile, Jin-hu extended an invitation for a quick cup of tea. The warm glow of sunset bathed the exterior of the Cheonji Dabang, a traditional tea house. As a slice of strawberry cake gently landed on the table, Jin-hu casually inquired about Ms. Sun-hee's thoughts on the New York training program. In the cozy tea house, the female office worker readily admitted her strong desire to participate in the New York program. Yet, her fingers nervously toyed with her teacup as she confessed her realistic doubts, knowing only 5 employees company-wide would be selected. She insisted that Jin-hu was different, urging him to apply, convinced he had a real chance after his impressive performance that day. Her expression determined, she promised to fully support him, just as she had today, so he could showcase the Gangdong branch's true capabilities. Jin-hu, his gaze serious, questioned if simply being a supportive force would truly be enough for her. As the fork sliced through the cake, Jin-hu reflected that despite inter-branch competition, the New York program remained a cutthroat individual battle where everyone fought for their own seat. Jin-hu's piercing question about her satisfaction with a supporting role caused her hands to clench tightly in her lap. She looked down, her voice resigned, stating that her personal satisfaction wouldn't alter the harsh realities of their world. She humbly declared she was simply not extraordinary, unlike him. Jin-hu immediately countered, insisting she was mistaken and already extraordinary, a statement that visibly startled her. Jin-hu recalled how she embodied true kindness, standing by her principles even when others chose convenience and ignored what was right. He observed that despite her self-doubt, she had flawlessly managed an immense workload today without a single error. This monumental effort was made even more impressive by how suddenly it had been thrust upon her. He asserted that her perceived shortcomings weren't a lack of ability, but a lack of opportunity, sliding the cake slightly forward as he made his point. With unwavering confidence, Jin-hu declared that he was capable of providing her with that very opportunity. A surprised pardon escaped her as Jin-hu proposed a radical plan. Every new account she opened would count for both their performances, effectively doubling her credit. He calmly explained how this strategy would propel her to the top AUM performer at the Gangdong branch, leveraging the credibility she had already meticulously built. She remained silent, deeply contemplating the audacious proposal. She gently pushed away the cake, politely declining the direct offer, but gratefully acknowledging the thoughtful sentiment behind it. She affirmed her trust in Jin-hu, yet resolutely stated she could not accept a proposal that was entirely one-sided. With tears in her eyes, she expressed profound gratitude for his high regard, feeling she had nothing valuable to offer in return, but finding his belief in her to be more than enough. Jin-hu was left speechless by her unexpected refusal, while in the background, another woman quietly shook her head. A chibified Jin-hu let out a pained groan, surprised by her rejection and completely unprepared, as she, equally startled, worriedly asked if he was all right. Still flustered, she requested a moment to properly process the situation. A throbbing pain assaulted Jin-hu's head as he silently wrestled with his frustration. He acknowledged the immense difficulty of his plan in America, recognizing her as the ideal partner and truly believing that someone so talented and sincere deserved far greater opportunities. He mused that relationships were far more intricate than he had assumed, realizing that good intentions alone were insufficient to earn someone's trust, as his teacup clinked softly. Perhaps the invisible wall between him and others felt higher because he had once been Jin-hu, leaving him unsure how to genuinely connect with people. He inwardly wondered what he was even supposed to say in such an awkward moment. He broke the silence, offering an apology if he had inadvertently made her uncomfortable. He then clarified, with a bead of sweat on his brow, that his proposition was not solely an act of goodwill. He revealed a crucial objective he absolutely had to achieve in America, and sincerely stated his genuine need for Ms. Sun-hee's help. He confessed his lack of clever tricks or social strategies, admitting he only knew one way to proceed. He laid bare his need for reliable allies and her own need for an opportunity to truly spread her wings, framing their shared ambition. He decided to simply be honest and hope she understood, then boldly invited her to join him on Wall Street. A soft "ft" escaped her, then Jin-hu, bewildered, questioned her unexpected laughter. She laughed heartily, admitting she always thought he was flawless, but now saw his surprisingly awkward side. Her comment on his straightforwardness elicited an embarrassed groan from Jin-hu. As the plate clinked softly, she pondered the concept of a relationship where both sides genuinely needed each other. A gentle smile formed on her lips as she admitted the idea wasn't entirely unappealing. With a decisive poke into the cake, she sincerely thanked him for the opportunity. Her voice filled with hope, she proposed they do their best together. She playfully tapped Jin-hu's cake with her fork, a light-hearted gesture of their newfound alliance. On that day, Jin-hu felt a strange, unprecedented sense of peace settle over him. Even though their partnership was born of mutual need, he offered her strawberry shortcake, and she playfully accepted, teasing him that this was a one-time indulgence, to which he simply replied, "Thank you." He wondered if this newfound comfort, this unique bond, was truly what it felt like to have a colleague he could genuinely open up to. As a new day dawned with optimistic clarity, Jin-hu greeted it. He observed with surprise that a huge line of clients had already formed outside, even before the morning session had officially begun. He turned away, a flicker of apprehension on his face, anticipating yet another relentlessly busy day. Jin-hu, noticing the chaotic murmuring, asked if something significant had occurred. The man in gray suit confirmed a major issue had landed, then decisively tapped Jin-hu's shoulder, telling him to skip the morning session because he was the one who would handle it. He informed Jin-hu that the client was already waiting in the private consultation room, urging him to go meet him. The man in gray suit warned that the demanding client would take everything if they made even the slightest mistake, prompting a concerned Jin-hu to question the man's identity. The man in gray suit declared his full trust in Jin-hu just as the door violently burst open. As Jin-hu stumbled back, confused and in pain, he wondered who on earth could be behind that door. A familiar voice declared his arrival, sending a jolt of shock through Jin-hu as he recognized it. The intimidating godfather of the Myeongdong private lending world, Chairman Han Myung-suk, coolly remarked on Jin-hu's youth. Current Cha Dae-woo adjusted his jacket, his thoughts already racing ahead as he anticipated the arrival, realizing they had come faster than he had expected. The older man, calm yet imposing, immediately cut to the chase, suggesting his identity was already known and questioning if current Cha Dae-woo truly needed an introduction. Current Cha Dae-woo confidently responded that no explanation was needed as he settled his suit. With a formal declaration, current Cha Dae-woo addressed the older man, recognizing him as Chairman Han Myung-guk. Current Cha Dae-woo then introduced himself, confidently offering a business card as a gesture of his professional standing. The older man nodded, cutting through the pleasantries to reveal he already knew current Cha Dae-woo and his reputation. The older man continued, observing current Cha Dae-woo's surprised expression as he revealed that his name had become increasingly whispered in influential circles. The older man laughed, remarking on current Cha Dae-woo's significant status as a person of interest in town, to which current Cha Dae-woo hoped it was for positive reasons. The older man clinked his teacup, quoting a powerful and somewhat ominous reputation of current Cha Dae-woo's accuracy that circulated among the people. Taking a sip, the older man revealed his true intention to test the limits of current Cha Dae-woo's renowned sixth sense with a calculated wager. The older man proposed an astronomical bet of 150 billion won, a figure that registered clearly on current Cha Dae-woo's surprised expression. Current Cha Dae-woo placed his teacup down, silently contemplating the staggering sum of 150 billion won. The older man, sipping his tea, observed current Cha Dae-woo's reaction, finding it less pronounced than he had anticipated. He then expressed a mild disappointment, feeling current Cha Dae-woo's reaction was understated for the big shark of Myeongdong, yet conceded the amount was still substantial enough. Current Cha Dae-woo firmly set his teacup down, preparing to lay out the full situation. Leaning back, current Cha Dae-woo confidently stated his reliance on proven information rather than vague concepts like spirits. He elaborated that his client's success stemmed from his meticulously unearthed information perfectly aligning with market realities, not some mystical, sixth sense. The older man's skepticism was palpable as he challenged how a newly joined chick could possibly uncover such high-level intelligence independently. Current Cha Dae-woo, with a confident smile, used a vivid metaphor of tracing a tree's roots to its trunk and then down to its source, illustrating his method of uncovering even the most hidden information. The older man hummed, deep in thought, as he processed Current Cha Dae-woo's intricate explanation. Current Cha Dae-woo, standing and gesturing pointedly, interpreted the older man's stake as an outright entrustment of the 130 billion won for a specific, undeclared purpose. Current Cha Dae-woo then declared that the 20 billion deposit was merely a smokescreen, exposing the true nature of the bet and startling the older man. The older man acknowledged Current Cha Dae-woo's impressive insight, admitting that the circulating rumors had significantly undersold his abilities. Leaning back with a slight smile, the older man praised Current Cha Dae-woo, recognizing him as a sharp young man with genuine insight, far more than just a smooth-talking swindler. With a decisive snap of his fingers, the older man announced one final test for Current Cha Dae-woo. As a subordinate swiftly lit his cigarette, the older man posed a crucial question, challenging Current Cha Dae-woo to explain why he, not his own extensive staff, was sought out. Current Cha Dae-woo began to dissect the older man's true intentions, deducing that a man so attuned to the flow of money wouldn't be concerned with the stock market itself. Leaning forward and slamming his hands down, Current Cha Dae-woo loudly confronted the older man, declaring the meeting was driven by a specific, pervasive rumor. The older man remained silently contemplative, his expression a subtle blend of surprise and deep thought after Current Cha Dae-woo's direct hit. With a stern command, the older man instructed his two subordinates, Secretary Kong and Secretary Choi, to leave the room. He added a stark warning to ensure complete privacy, instructing them to prevent any rats from eavesdropping, a command both secretaries acknowledged with profound respect. The door abruptly burst open, catching two eavesdropping office workers by surprise, sending the male worker stumbling backward in shock. The man in the suit sternly commanded them to move away from the door, to which the male worker quickly stammered an apology. Both office workers sighed in awkward embarrassment, having been thoroughly caught in their attempt to eavesdrop. Outside the closed double doors, the two suited subordinates took up their posts, standing guard. Current Cha Dae-woo, now smiling, took the older man's actions as a confirmation that he had hit his mark, directly asking what the chairman truly wanted to know, prompting the older man to observe his rough, unreserved manner. The older man, flicking his cigarette, approved of Current Cha Dae-woo's directness, stating his desire to know if the rumor would indeed come true. With a confident smirk, Current Cha Dae-woo unequivocally affirmed that the rumor would come to pass. The older man, his expression still skeptical, pressed for the basis of Current Cha Dae-woo's unwavering certainty. Current Cha Dae-woo, looking down at the table, asserted that the crucial factor was not the basis, but the precise timing of the event. As Current Cha Dae-woo calmly wrote on a piece of paper, he confidently declared that he knew the exact timing, down to the very hour. The older man tapped his cigarette, challenging Current Cha Dae-woo's unparalleled certainty and questioning why, if such clear information existed, he would even be present. Current Cha Dae-woo, writing intently, pointed out that the older man had come to him, clinging desperately to a what-if scenario. He continued, asserting that the older man was grasping at straws, and ordinary information from those straws would be utterly useless. The older man leaned aggressively over the table, his gaze fixed on Current Cha Dae-woo's hand. Current Cha Dae-woo pointed to the paper, revealing the two vital pieces of information, the clampdown on borrowed name trading, and the precise date the rumor would materialize. With his hands clasped, Current Cha Dae-woo confidently stated that the ultimate choice now rested with the chairman. He articulated that this was ultimately an investment in a possibility, a concept that a man who had built a company of the chairman's scale would inherently understand. The older man remained silent, intently contemplating Current Cha Dae-woo's words and the paper lying between them. As he tapped his cigarette, the older man began to outline the terms, contingent on current Cha Dae-woo correctly resolving the problem with precise timing. Exhaling a cloud of smoke, the older man offered current Cha Dae-woo 10% of the 130 billion won as his reward. Current Cha Dae-woo tapped his pen, mentally calculating the 13 billion won and finding the sum surprisingly uninspiring. Current Cha Dae-woo let out an unimpressed hum, his slight smirk speaking volumes about the offer's inadequacy. While two eavesdropping office workers discussed the progress of the negotiations, current Cha Dae-woo proposed a new condition, depositing the entire 130 billion through his branch for 6 months. The older man's shock was evident as current Cha Dae-woo audaciously added that all profits from the 130 billion over those 6 months would go to his branch. The older man's face darkened with rage, accusing current Cha Dae-woo of severely overstepping his bounds. Wiping cigarette ash with a menacing gesture, the older man threatened to pull all his money and terminate the deal if current Cha Dae-woo was so certain of the outcome. Current Cha Dae-woo, with a determined gaze, countered that the chairman was not a man who would ever willingly accept a loss. Current Cha Dae-woo confidently declared that if the chairman recoiled from uncertainty, he would never have become the godfather of Myeongdong, reminding him that money never slept. The older man hummed contemplatively, current Cha Dae-woo's words clearly resonating with his inherent nature. With a slight laugh, the older man admitted his genuine confusion, unsure whether he was conversing with a young man or the seasoned chairman of a major conglomerate. The older man conceded, agreeing to sign the deposit contract within the week, only for current Cha Dae-woo to interject with yet another exasperating demand. In a stylized vision, a chibi current Cha Dae-woo audaciously requested a single future favor from the exasperated chibi chairman, who reluctantly agreed to his relentless demands. Current Cha Dae-woo bowed respectfully, thanking the chairman for the clean deal, as the older man watched him in silence. The older man ominously gripped his cane, his voice dropping as he issued a stark reminder. Standing tall and stern, the older man made it clear that the entire deal hinged entirely on every single one of current Cha Dae-woo's predictions proving absolutely true. The older man's voice hardened, issuing a chilling warning about the devastating consequences if any lie or even a small mistake were to slip through. With an intense, menacing glare, he threatened current Cha Dae-woo with a very steep price for incurring his loss. As the older man flicked his cigarette, current Cha Dae-woo calmly reassured him that he had nothing to worry about. With a confident, almost cocky smile, current Cha Dae-woo promised that from that moment forward, the older man would find himself smiling every time they met. The year marked a pivotal financial reform, the real name financial system, which mandated clear ownership for every flow of money. In August 1993, a presidential emergency order sent shockwaves, forever altering Korean financial history. Hidden accounts became illegal, shutting down secret money flows and tying everyone to a legal name, unleashing a tidal wave of chaos that exposed tax evasion and rocked every corner of the nation's economy. A man like Chairman Han, ever vigilant for financial shifts, would undoubtedly seek to know the precise enforcement date of the real name system. Jin-hu understood that for loan sharks, dirty money was not a choice but an inescapable fate. A male office worker patted Byun Sun-hee's back, congratulating her on an achievement yet to be revealed. The man in the gray suit announced Chairman Han had brought them an astounding 130 billion, crediting the female office worker and calling for applause. As others applauded, the female office worker questioned why she was being credited, wondering if it wasn't Mr. Choi. The female office worker tried to explain the true source of the success, but the branch manager quickly asserted that Cha Dae-woo had also played his part. The man in the gray suit then turned to Jin-hu, calling him Chief Cha, a title that clearly surprised him. The manager gulped, explaining that after successfully handling Chairman Han's case and observing the current climate, he had made a decision. He reasoned that having someone handle such significant clients as a mere rank-and-file employee would diminish the branch's standing. The manager then proudly declared Jin-hu their new, consultation chief, promising a private office for his continued good work. With a loud laugh, the manager then pronounced the female office worker the perfect support staff for Chief Cha, praising them as a well-oiled machine, though they both appeared uncomfortable. Jin-hu mused internally that, consultation chief, was hardly a formal title, merely a vague designation. Jin-hu quietly acknowledged that this was likely the best the manager could offer a newbie, then politely thanked him for the consideration as the manager called them his lucky charms. Suddenly, a male office worker interjected, declaring his disagreement with the decision. The male office worker angrily protested the impropriety of a rank-and-file employee receiving a private office, an unfairness echoed by a female colleague who pointed out even assistant managers lacked such a perk. He thumped his point, arguing that setting such a precedent would irrevocably damage their corporate culture. He insisted that the decision would undermine firm discipline, as whispers of agreement spread through the office. The manager then addressed Assistant Manager Jung directly, challenging him to argue fairness properly if he insisted on doing so. The manager presented his irrefutable evidence. Ms. Sun-hee had brought in 130 billion in new assets that day, effectively 150 billion when factoring in Chairman Han's potential withdrawal. He then highlighted Jin-hu's performance, shrugging as he revealed Jin-hu had single-handedly met the branch's monthly AUM target in a single day. He then challenged the disgruntled employees, asking if any of them had ever achieved such astounding numbers. The manager sternly told them to get their heads straight, demanding they achieve comparable performance before complaining and warning them against undermining their colleagues. Gasps and whispers spread through the office, with colleagues admitting the incredible amount justified special treatment, and some even envying Ms. Sun-hee for working with Jin-hu. The female office worker choked up in frustration, but the manager cut her off, demanding an end to the chatter. He then directed everyone back to their desks for the morning session, offering to hear any remaining complaints in his office after work. The male office worker muttered bitterly, his teeth grinding in frustration, wishing Manager Oh were there to intervene. He flinched slightly, conceding that even if Oh Kyung-sik were present, the outcome would remain unchanged. Jin-hu, his anger contained, retorted that a man who abandoned his post would hardly care about such trivial matters. He snickered, adding that he doubted Assistant Manager Shin, Young-suk or Assistant Manager Jung Sungjin would care either. The male office worker grunted in furious frustration, calling Jin-hu that little punk. The female office worker watched in silent shock. With teeth grinding, the female office worker muttered Byun Sun-hee's name, seething with anger and stress. The Gangdong branch soared to first place overall. They had triumphantly surpassed even the Uido HQ and the Tehran-ro branch, securing their top position. While rumors played a part, Chairman Han Myung-guk's 130 billion deposit was the undeniable game-changer, as Jin-hu stirred his drink thoughtfully. This was precisely why he was known as the godfather of Myeongdong. The female office worker burst out, excitedly proclaiming that it was out. To a surprised male colleague, she repeated, nearly shouting, that the rankings had been released. She then joyfully specified that it was the performance rankings for the U.S. training bonus vacation. A murmur of excitement spread through the office as colleagues gathered to see the posted rankings. One male office worker politely asked for an excuse. He explained he just needed to step away for a moment. The female office worker gasped, utterly shocked by what she saw. A male colleague congratulated a trembling Ms. Sun-hee, whose hands were clasped in joyous disbelief. The male worker revealed her astonishing victory. She had placed first in performance across the entire company, overwhelming her with emotion. Jin-hu laughed, announcing his second-place finish meant they would both be traveling to America for training. The female office worker firmly grabbed Jin-hu's hand, calling his name with an overwhelming sense of gratitude. With eyes closed in happiness, she thanked him profusely, promising to never forget his immense favor. She earnestly vowed not to waste the opportunity he had given her, promising to grow and repay him. Jin-hu offered a slight smile, crediting her hard work and modestly claiming he only snuck his spoon onto the edge of the table. A chibi Jin-hu politely asked the startled chibi female office worker to release his hand. She flustered an apology for getting overwhelmed, but Jin-hu cleared his throat and assured her it was fine. Another female office worker clapped her hands, remarking on what a perfect couple they made. Shin Young-suk smirked, making a cynical remark that people truly matched best when they were at the same level. She giggled sinisterly, making a spiteful prediction that they would fall for each other on the trip and return with a baby. The female office worker flinched in alarm, calling out to assistant manager Shin. Jin-hu sharply stated that Shin Young-suk might not know, because she had never been. He then firmly clarified that training abroad was not a vacation, but a serious place of learning. He sternly requested that she keep her baseless slander to herself. The office phone suddenly rang. A male office worker informed a surprised Jin-hu that he had a call. Jin-hu, with a hint of surprise, agreed to take the call immediately. Shin Young-suk flinched, her face contorted in frustrated silence. A dark aura swirled around Shin Young-suk, her anger and frustration palpable as she bit her finger. With a menacing expression, Shin Young-suk silently vowed to kill Sunhee, consumed by vengeful thoughts. Jin-hu answered the phone, professionally identifying himself as Chief Cha Dae-woo of Jowa Securities, Gangdong Branch. The man on the other end, his voice hinting at surprise, revealed he had already heard the news of Jin-hu's U.S. training. Jin-hu internally acknowledged the terrifying speed of the news, then confirmed the trip, prompting the caller to immediately inquire about their deal. Jin-hu smirked, casually informing the caller that he was just about to contact him regarding their arrangement. The man on the phone made a cryptic, grave remark about the weather being very cloudy on August 12. He noted the timing was sooner than expected, advising swift action to prepare for the metaphorical storm ahead. The caller stated his trust in Jin-hu's words for now, suggesting they meet again after the rain clears, to which Jin-hu politely agreed. The call ended abruptly with a decisive click as the receiver was pressed down. The chair creaked as the man rose from his desk. He stared out the window, ominously repeating the date, August 12, The inviting aroma of Aine's special kimchi stew filled the cozy home as Cha Dae-woo's wife proudly announced her dish. His wife remarked that his bonus meant sambap instead of clubbing, but Jin-hu, embodying Cha Dae-woo, questioned if they were overdoing it, though she dismissed his concern, citing payday. As she scooped the warm food, his wife pressed him on whether his American training was truly happening. Jin-hu confirmed his plan to finish training early and leave ahead of schedule, pouring a drink as he explained his branch manager had granted him special leave. A cheerful older man had once praised his efforts, advising him to take it easy and manage his condition until training concluded. His wife then asked his departure date, and Jin-hu calmly stated he would leave in 3 days on a morning flight. His wife fidgeted with a bowl, lost in thought as a quiet moment settled between them. Catching Jin-hu slightly off guard, his wife tentatively asked for a favor, acknowledging his training wasn't a vacation. Jin-hu prompted her to speak, but his wife hesitated, fumbling for words about his upcoming trip to the States. Then, with a sudden reveal, she requested the latest issue of Vogue, catching Jin-hu off guard. Jin-hu repeated the name in confusion, questioning if it was indeed a fashion magazine. Vogue, the most influential magazine in the fashion world, was a practical declaration of upcoming trends. His surprised query about her interest in fashion startled his wife, making her flustered and stammering. Fidgeting slightly, she clarified that she was more interested in designing clothes than wearing them. Jin-hu then inquired if that passion was why she chose to work at Shinhan Apparel. With a bright smile, she explained her practical hope, to learn the ropes at Shinhan Apparel, earn money, and gain experience in a related field. Jin-hu mused to himself about the possibility of someday reaching a high position in that world, if he could just get his hands dirty. Despite her bright and optimistic voice, Jin-hu's eyes widened in intense distress, knowing a hidden truth contrary to her belief. For Aine, the path ahead was ominously paved with nothing but despair. Adult Jin-hu, head bowed, sank to the floor in lament, crying out Aine's name in distress. He was consumed by guilt, lamenting how the poor child had lost her mother, realizing he had paid it back. Mourners whispered sadly about terminal lung cancer, lamenting that it was caught too late. An older man expressed profound sadness, imagining her pain and speculating that the busy Cha family had likely been too preoccupied with work to notice. A mourner quietly pointed out Aine's husband, his presence drawing attention. A gasp of disbelief rippled through the onlookers as they confirmed it was her husband, smoking at the very funeral of a wife who died of lung cancer. The murmurs continued, detailing how his business had failed, forcing him to beg money from her, now compounded by incessant gambling. Shadowy figures wept, lamenting Aine's suffering and the husband's uncaring heart, which merely begrudged the costs of a grief he didn't truly feel. Suddenly jolted, Jin-hu gasped, pulled violently from his grim vision by his wife's sharp call. "What did you say?" he asked, slightly confused, as she calmly repeated her request to check her mother's days off before buying the magazine. She then reassuringly offered that he didn't have to get the magazine if it was too much trouble, vowing to find a way to get one herself. Jin-hu, with a gentle smile, firmly refused her offer, assuring her it was no trouble and that he would buy every single issue. A chibi version of his wife shrieked with delight, overflowing with gratitude for his promise. Jin-hu called her name, and she responded with eager anticipation. He then proposed a radical change, that she endure her current job until September, then shift to a new position where she could earn more, go to college, and secure a much higher salary. She laughed, waving a dismissive hand as she questioned what kind of company he was even describing. With radiating conviction, Jin-hu declared it would exist, and he would create that very company just for her. On that bright, clear day, Jin-hu began his journey, departing for America and China. A weary sigh escaped Jin-hu as he confirmed all the paperwork was finally finished. Stretched out in boredom, Jin-hu agreed that the flight was long and exhausting, as they now merely awaited the company's name. Rubbing his tired eyes, Jin-hu couldn't agree more with the sentiment of exhaustion. As he reflected, Jin-hu mused about Cha Dae-woo's experiences, wondering how much they differed. For someone who had spent a life holed up in his room, every single step of departure proved utterly overwhelming. A security officer placed a blue bag onto the conveyor belt, immediately triggering an alarming beeping sound. Confused, Jin-hu questioned the discovery, as the security officer sternly asked why he had brought banned scissors onto a carry-on. Flustered, Jin-hu explained he thought he might need them in the States, sheepishly admitting he forgot to discard them before boarding. Jin-hu apologized for his nervous babbling at security, but the female office worker reassured him, admitting her own first-time jitters. Clearing his throat, Jin-hu expressed his profound gratitude for the training and the money provided, though it felt late to say so. The female office worker looked surprised, asking if he had already forgotten something important. With confident resolve, she asserted that she would absolutely repay the chance he had given her, stating that this was nothing in comparison. As the plane rumbled, Jin-hu inquired about her LA contact and offered help, but she revealed she had already set up a company in the States through him, surprising Jin-hu. She cheerfully explained that the company was in its very early stages, requiring her to head to LA early to sort out many issues. Jin-hu expressed his impressed surprise that she had established a company before even studying abroad, to which she credited his knowledge of overseas business. An announcement echoed through the cabin, informing passengers of the imminent takeoff and instructing them to fasten their seatbelts securely for safety. The automated voice concluded its instructions, reminding everyone to remain seated. Jin-hu noted their impending takeoff, while the female office worker admitted her heart was pounding, a mix of fear and excitement making it feel real. Jin-hu attempted to downplay the moment, asserting it was merely a plane taking off, nothing truly special. The narration observed the incredibly smooth ride, barely a vibration, predicting an equally uneventful takeoff. The female office worker attempted to reassure Jin-hu not to be nervous, but he remained tense, eyes tightly shut. A sudden jolt threw Jin-hu against his seat as the aircraft lurched into takeoff acceleration, forcing a gasp from his lips. The plane surged upward with an intense rumbling, and Jin-hu felt an overwhelming sensation of being crushed by gravity. His stomach churned violently, threatening to betray him as waves of nausea washed over Jin-hu. As Jin-hu hunched over, retching by the restroom door, the female office worker gently tapped, asking if he was okay. He confirmed he felt a bit better after throwing up, prompting the concerned female office worker to offer to ask a flight attendant for juice. Jin-hu groaned, declining the offer as he believed he couldn't even keep water down at that moment. The faint smell of fuel and subtle vibrations made sleep impossible for Jin-hu, who despaired at the thought of enduring another 11 hours. A sudden jolt rattled the plane, amplifying Jin-hu's distress and the female office worker's worry about impending turbulence. A flight attendant announced that due to current turbulence, the aircraft would shake, instructing all passengers to remain seated. Patting his shoulder, the female office worker gently suggested they talk about anything but the plane, hoping a distraction would alleviate his suffering. The female office worker asked how he met his LA contact, and Jin-hu, gesturing thoughtfully, explained it was initially through PC communication. Looking out the window, Jin-hu elaborated that he had been searching for a specific type of person, and his contact had simply happened to catch his eye. Fate, it seemed, truly resembled coincidence, as the narration introduced Michael Choi, the Korean-American computer science student Jin-hu had trusted to set up his U.S. company. Though he might have been a significant figure to Cha Dae-woo, the current Jin-hu felt no such regard for Michael. Before, when Jin-hu had been trapped in his room, he had serendipitously encountered Michael, a Stanford student, through PC networks, leading to frequent conversations. Their talking, however, had mostly consisted of Michael asking about formulas, with Jin-hu merely providing a kind of customer support service. Jin-hu wondered why Michael treated him so casually, a stark contrast to his outwardly ordinary appearance as an engineering student. In truth, at night, Michael roamed PC networks, his fingers flying across the keyboard as he hacked corporate systems purely for fun. Luckily, in this new life, Michael was still indulging in those very same little mischiefs. Thanks to Michael's skills, Jin-hu could quietly log into America each night through the company's account, a practice that began a few months earlier. Michael, leaning back casually, smugly remarked on how easily he had cracked yet another system. He then smacked the keyboard in boredom, deeming the securities firm pathetic for its weak defenses. Suddenly, Michael's eyes widened in utter surprise. An unexpected greeting from guest appeared on his screen, introducing himself as Mr. Choi. Jin-hu reacted with alarm, demanding to know what was happening to his computer. His mind raced with fear as he wondered if he was being hacked. On the screen, a mysterious guest greeted Mr. Choi, who frantically questioned their identity and access, only for guest to type rapidly, urging an immediate shutdown. An unsettling voice declared that everything on his computer had already been checked, as a hand slid onto his shoulder. Jin-hu recoiled in profound shock and disbelief. He panicked further, demanding to know how much they knew and if his true identity had been uncovered. Original Cha Dae-woo, however, calmly revealed the Stanford student was a hacker who breached corporate security for fun, causing Jin-hu to flinch. Jin-hu cursed, but original Cha Dae-woo pressed on, asking what would happen if his school discovered his nocturnal activities. The chat reiterated the exposure of the Stanford hacker and his corporate breaches, with me furiously typing back to ask what guest wanted, who calmly suggested there was no need to be so hostile. Original Cha Dae-woo then cunningly flattered him, calling his talent quite extraordinary. He dismissed his current path as nonsense, shrugging as he questioned if it wasn't frustrating to waste such natural-born talent merely as a regular hacker. Original Cha Dae-woo then offered to show him a whole new level of technology, and Jin-hu listened intently. With a hand extended, original Cha Dae-woo invited Michael to step out into the world with him. Jin-hu reflected that at first, he had considered the man a lunatic. He admitted that he had gone along with the proposal, feeling he had nothing to lose, yet he hadn't truly believed him then. As they worked together, Jin-hu's mindset gradually changed, especially when Cha offered him a workaround that would save him on phone bills. To his astonishment, Jin-hu discovered his phone bill really had barely come out to anything. A profound realization settled in: this guy was the real deal. He possessed technology that was truly beyond imagination. Amidst the murmuring crowd, Jin-hu confidently urged Cha to hurry and get there. He was eager to finally see what kind of guy Cha Dae-woo was, face to face. Cha Dae-woo sighed in exhaustion, feeling as though he had almost died from the journey. Shin Young-suk echoed his sentiment, equally weary. Cha Dae-woo groaned, lamenting his churning stomach from the long-haul flight and the unbearable thought of boarding another plane so soon. Shin Young-suk added to their woes, recalling the grueling 3 to 4 hour wait at LAX for their domestic transfer. Though relieved that domestic flights allowed direct terminal access, Shin Young-suk's tone shifted to utter frustration about U.S. immigration. She concluded that it was the absolute worst, a sentiment likely shared by Cha Dae-woo as he nervously sweated under the stern gaze of an airport security officer. Shin Young-suk cheered with relief, ecstatic to finally be outside the airport. Shin Young-suk asked if they would travel by car now, but Cha Dae-woo looked around, searching for their contact party who was supposed to meet them. Cha Dae-woo gasped in surprise at the welcoming party waiting for them. Jin-hu greeted Michael, leaving Cha Dae-woo utterly confused. Jin-hu warmly told him he had arrived just in time. Cha Dae-woo rattled, visibly shaken by a sudden, shocking realization. With an expletive, Cha Dae-woo demanded if he was Dae-woo Cha. Cha Dae-woo exclaimed that he was much younger than expected and asked his age, which annoyed Jin-hu, who had anticipated an older man in his 40s. Jin-hu sighed, suggesting they rest first after his 20-hour flight, prompting an apologetic Cha Dae-woo to acknowledge his inconsideration. Cha Dae-woo then tilted his head, asking about the woman standing next to him. Jin-hu introduced her as his colleague, Ms. Sun-hee-byun, who then greeted Cha Dae-woo. After Shin Young-suk reiterated her greeting, Jin-hu introduced the other man as his business partner, Michael Choi. Jin-hu suggested they grab a bite at a Korean restaurant, to which Shin Young-suk readily agreed, as he confirmed he knew a delicious place. Jin-hu then paused, smiling mischievously as he said he had forgotten to say something, prompting confused noises from Cha Dae-woo and Shin Young-suk. With a sweeping gesture, Jin-hu enthusiastically welcomed them to the USA. Shin Young-suk, concerned, reminded him that he had said the office was in Silicon Valley, to which Jin-hu simply affirmed he had. She observed that it looked a lot like a warehouse, as Jin-hu slid into the building. Jin-hu, confidently carrying a box, confirmed it was indeed a warehouse, surprising Shin Young-suk. He explained that as the office of a small, newly established brokerage firm, it would be weirder if it were huge. Shin Young-suk conceded his point, though she had still expected a massive office since it was America, and Jin-hu laughed in response. Jin-hu asked where they were stuck and to see the paperwork, learning that the FINRA/SEC documents, a mandatory legal procedure for establishing a brokerage firm, kept getting rejected. Jin-hu asked what the problem was, and Cha Dae-woo stated there were 3 issues. Cha Dae-woo explained the 3 rejections: the WSP didn't match practices, additional visa and U.S. residency documents were needed for Form U-4, and proof of financial standing was insufficient. Jin-hu decided they would handle the second issue first. Jin-hu grunted with effort, working intensely at the computer while the others watched, curious and confused. Shin Young-suk offered her assistance, asking what she could do to help. Jin-hu, making a sound of deep concentration, assigned Ms. Sun-hee the task of reviewing the WSP. He explained that the WSP was essentially a written plan for the company to safely supervise employee and client transactions, serving as the actual control guidelines. Jin-hu expressed confidence that with her extensive experience, Ms. Sun-hee might spot something he missed, making revision a piece of cake if they could find what needed fixing, and she affirmed her understanding. Jin-hu left the WSP to Shin Young-suk, then instructed Michael to get started too, to which Cha Dae-woo responded, "Okay, boss." 8 hours ticked by. Jin-hu checked on the utterly exhausted Cha Dae-woo, who could barely manage a response. He then checked on Shin Young-suk, who, though tired, confirmed she was fortunately still breathing. Jin-hu, fluttering papers, expressed satisfaction that Form U4 was sorted, and thanks to Ms. Sun-hee, the WSP issues were identified. The remaining problem, Jin-hu stated, was financial standing, as they were short on operating funds. Rubbing his shoulder, Jin-hu reassured them not to worry, promising to solve it soon. Cha Dae-woo, rubbing his neck, hesitantly asked for confirmation, and Jin-hu confidently affirmed it. Jin-hu then announced that they had another schedule and would need to leave tomorrow. Cha Dae-woo acknowledged, asking for an update on the financial issue, while Jin-hu, making sweeping gestures, confirmed he would promptly organize and resubmit the paperwork for approval. Jin-hu casually told Shin Young-suk that he was borrowing her car. Cha Dae-woo thanked Ms. Sun-hee, saying she did a wonderful job and saved them from a total nightmare, and she modestly accepted, pleased to have been of help. Shin Young-suk then thoughtfully asked if they had another schedule before the training session began. Jin-hu, smiling slyly, revealed they had one more place to drop by, and Shin Young-suk immediately asked where it was. Jin-hu playfully declared he would keep the destination a secret until they arrived. Shin Young-suk teased him about his love for mystery as they settled into the car. But she persisted, hoping he could at least answer one question. Shin Young-suk then directly asked him the name of the company. Jin-hu revealed the name with a subtle smirk, Balance. He confirmed it was a brokerage firm, Balance Corporation. The elegant displays of a high-end boutique awaited an important selection. Jin-hu waited with a slight hesitation in the luxurious private fitting room. Jin-hu confidently reassured Ms. Sun-hee that the clothes she had chosen would look magnificent on her. When Ms. Sun-hee voiced her apprehension about the unfamiliar style, Jin-hu gently encouraged her to come out and see. The clicking of high heels announced Ms. Sun-hee's emergence from the changing room. Dressed in a new light purple dress and matching shawl, Ms. Sun-hee stepped out, eagerly seeking an opinion. Jin-hu offered a genuine compliment, affirming that the sophisticated look suited her perfectly. A soft, embarrassed thank you escaped Ms. Sun-hee's lips, betraying her pleasure. A female employee interrupted, informing Ms. Sun-hee it was time for her hair appointment. Jin-hu cleared his throat, calling out to Ms. Sun-hee as her shawl rustled, signaling her departure. Ms. Sun-hee paused, looking back over her shoulder with a questioning gaze. Jin-hu offered a subtle suggestion, believing an updo would enhance her look. Ms. Sun-hee was pleasantly surprised by the thoughtful advice, thanking him with a warm smile. Jin-hu hummed softly, taking a sip from his teacup, a hint of satisfaction on his face. Under the dazzling lights of a starry desert sky, an unexpected new destination unfolded, Las Vegas. As the city lights blurred past, Jin-hu confirmed his wife's observation that the Grand Mirage Hotel Casino had only recently opened its doors. Cha Dae-woo's wife voiced her concern about relaxing too much, but Jin-hu reassured her, urging her to simply enjoy herself. With a confident smile, Jin-hu promised he would take care of her every need. The slot machine whirred as Cha Dae-woo's wife pressed the button, remarking on a near miss. Cha Dae-woo's wife inquired about her losses, and Jin-hu promptly calculated it as $20, or 16,000 Korean won. Jin-hu offered another game, but his wife candidly admitted she wasn't finding it fun. With a sigh, Cha Dae-woo's wife mused that gambling felt like purchasing the illusion of hope in an uncertain world. As Jin-hu acknowledged the game of probability, his wife added her thought about the $20, just as a waitress cheerfully offered drinks. Holding a cocktail, Cha Dae-woo's wife declared she would rather spend money on delicious food than gamble. Clinking glasses, Cha Dae-woo's wife expressed concern that Jin-hu was too busy taking care of her to enjoy himself. Jin-hu internally acknowledged the hint, realizing he should give his wife space. Jin-hu let out an awkward laugh, attempting to downplay his attentiveness to her. As they walked toward a waiting taxi, Jin-hu asked where she would wait, and she replied, "In our hotel lounge." With a handshake, Jin-hu encouraged his wife to take her time and enjoy herself. As the taxi pulled away, Jin-hu stood alone in the subdued night, having seen his wife off. The taxi roared away into the night, and Jin-hu prepared to embark on his own mission. With a confident, mischievous smile, Jin-hu questioned whether it was time to begin his own serious game. His goal was clear: acquire $30,000 in extra funds from the casino. This was also an invaluable chance to test the limits of his concentration and the full extent of his perfect memory within Cha Dae-woo's body. Amidst the opulent casino floor, he silently declared his game of choice, blackjack. Jin-hu silently observed the busy casino floor, his gaze settling on a blackjack table. His mind honed in on one particular game table that looked promising. As cards were dealt with a soft slide, Jin-hu observed a player declare, "I'll stand." The dealer invited him to watch, but Jin-hu affirmed he would join the next game instead. The dealer slapped down a card, declaring his understanding and proceeding to check the outcome. The dealer announced his win, to the disbelief of a guest who couldn't comprehend his loss. The dealer then announced that the card shoe was empty. He prepared to introduce a completely new deck for the upcoming game. With a flourish, the dealer fanned out the new deck, inviting players to inspect the cards for fairness. A slight grin touched Jin-hu's lips as he realized this was precisely why he had chosen a table where the shoe was almost empty. With eyes glowing, Jin-hu's perfect memory instantaneously absorbed and committed the entire order of the cards to his mind. As chips clinked onto the table, Jin-hu placed his bet, having already deduced 3 possible card arrangements from the dealer's shuffle. The cards were dealt to player 3, and with each revelation, the intricate possibilities of the game narrowed, bringing him closer to the right answer. The dealer's question hung in the air: hit or stand? Hit. Jin-hu declared, knowing that from this moment, the game was a fierce battle of pure concentration. An hour later, a significant crowd had gathered, drawn by the extraordinary play unfolding at one blackjack table. To his clear surprise, the dealer announced he had busted, going over 21. The dealer confirmed player 3's win, prompting an amazed man in a suit to declare, "Man, seriously, you're no joke." The astonished crowd muttered in awe, wondering how he had managed to win 20 rounds in a row, demanding to know his secret. In the surveillance room, a concerned man in a blue suit instructed security to keep a close eye on player 3 at table 2. Surveillance confirmed suspicions of card counting at table 2, ordering continuous on-site monitoring and a table change if anything unusual was detected. With a decisive slap, the dealer laid down a card, announcing he had busted yet again. The dealer declared player 3 the winner, and a wave of applause erupted from the festive crowd. As Jin-hu prepared for the next game, a man in a suit interrupted him. The man in the suit informed him abruptly that he could no longer continue playing at this table, leaving Jin-hu shocked. Jin-hu realized with a quick glance that he was already being backed off. Backing off was a casino's potent, authorized move to bar a player, even without rule violations, simply for winning too much or arousing suspicion. Amidst the murmuring onlookers, Jin-hu expressed his surprise at being restricted after winning barely $30,000. As he clinked the chips, Jin-hu wondered if the restriction was, perhaps, due to racism. The potential implication of racism left a distinctly unpleasant taste in his mouth. The man in the blue suit then offered an astonishing proposition: move to the VIP room, and switch the game from blackjack to baccarat. He clarified, proposing a move to a more easily monitored room with a floor manager serving as the dealer. With a confident grin, Jin-hu accepted, stating he had absolutely nothing to hide. As Jin-hu further raised his bet, the man in the blue suit demanded if his on-site team was just going to keep listening. On the monitor, Jin-hu boldly declared his intention to test the very might of the Mirage Casino, causing a man in the surveillance room to flinch. With a serious expression, the man in the blue suit listened intently for instructions from the pit boss. The man in the gray suit, the pit boss, let out a broad laugh. He commented with a confident smile that quite an interesting fellow had just rolled in.